The light illumined you this morning, Theodore said, making a deep curtsy that set the brown fringe of her shawl swaying. She had all the fabled Domani grace, though her high-necked dress was really quite modest. Domani women were not known for modesty. We did as you commanded, but no one saw anybody near Marigan's tent last night. Some of the men remembered seeing Halima, Theolane added sourly, with a much briefer bend of her knees. But aside from that, they hardly recalled whether they went to sleep. Many women disapproved of Delana's secretary, but it was her next remark that made Theolane's round face darker than usual. We met Tiana while we were roaming about. She told us to go to bed and be quick about it. Unconsciously, she stroked the blue fringe on her shawl. New Aes Sedai almost always wore their shawls more often than they needed to. So Swan said. Giving them a smile she hoped was welcoming, Egwene took her place behind the small table. Carefully, the chair tilted for a moment anyway, until she reached down and pulled the legs straight. An edge of folded parchment peeked out from beneath the stone inkwell. Her hands twitched toward it, but she made them be still. Too many sisters saw little need for courtesy. She would not be one of those. Besides, these two had a claim on her. I am sorry for your difficulties, daughters. Made Aes Sedai by her decree on being raised Amelin, they faced the same predicament as she, but lacking the added shield of the Amelin stole, small shield that had proved. Most sisters behaved as though they were still only accepted. What went on inside the Ajas was seldom known outside, but it was rumored that they truly had had to beg admittance, and that guardians had been named to oversee their behavior. No one had ever heard the like, but everyone took it for fact. She had done them no favor. Another thing that had been necessary, though. I will speak to Tiana. It might do some good. For a day. Or an hour. Thank you, Mother, Theodrin said, but there is no need to bother yourself. Still, she also touched her shawl, hands lingering. Tiana wanted to know why we were up so late, she added after a moment, but we didn't tell her. There was no need for secrecy, daughter. A pity they had not found a witness, though. Mogedian's rescuer would remain a shadow half glimpsed, always the most frightening sort. She glanced at the tiny corner of parchment, itching to read it. Maybe Swan had discovered something. Thank you both. Theodrin recognized a dismissal and made her manners to go, but stopped when Phaelane remained where she was. I wish I had held the oath rod already, Phaelane told Egwene in tones of frustration, so you could know what I say is true. This isn't the time to bother the Amalin, Theodrin began, then folded her hands and turned her attention to Egwene. Patience blended with something else on her face. Clearly the stronger of the two in the power, she always took the lead. Yet this time she was prepared to step back. In aid of what, Egwene wondered. It isn't the oath rod that makes a woman Aes Sedai, daughter, whatever some believe. Speak the truth to me and I will believe it. I don't like you. Fairlane's mop of dark curls swayed as she shook her head for emphasis. You must know that. You probably think I was mean when you were a novice, when you came back to the White Tower after running away. But I still believe you didn't get half the punishment you should have. Maybe my admitting it will help you know I speak the truth. It isn't as though we have no choice even now. Romanda offered to take us under her protection, and so did Lilane. They said they'd see we were tested and raised properly as soon as we returned to the tower. Her face grew angrier, and Theodrin rolled her eyes and broke in. Mother, what Phaelane is fumbling all around without getting to the point is that we didn't attach ourselves to you because we had no choice, and we didn't do it in gratitude for the shawl. She pursed her lips, as if thinking that raising them Aes Sedai in the manner Egwene had was not really a gift to inspire much gratitude. Then why? Egwene asked, leaning back. The chair shifted, but held. Phaelane jumped in before Theodrin could more than open her mouth. Because you are the Amelin seat. She still sounded angry. We can see what happens. Some of the sisters think you're Shiriam's puppet, but most believe Romanda or Lilane tells you where and when to step. It is not right. Her face was twisted in a scowl. I left the tower because what Elida did wasn't right. They raised you, Amelin. So I am yours, if you will have me. If you can trust me without the oath rod, you must believe me. And you, Theodrin? Egwene said quickly, schooling her face. Knowing how the sisters felt was bad enough. Hearing it again was painful. I am yours too, Theodrin sighed. If you'll have me. She spread her hands disparagingly. We are not much, I know, but it looks as though we are all you have. I must admit I was hesitant, Mother. Feolane is the one who kept insisting we do this. Frankly, she settled her shawl again unnecessarily, and her voice frowned. Frankly, I do not see how you can win out over Romanda and Lulaine. But we are trying to behave as Aes Sedai, even though we aren't really yet. We will not be that, Mother, whatever you say, until the other sisters see us as Aes Sedai, and that won't happen until we have been tested and have sworn the 3 oaths. Plucking the folded scrap of parchment out from under the inkwell, Egwene fingered it while she thought. Feolane was the driving force behind this? That seemed as unlikely as a wolf befriending the shepherd. She suspected dislike was a mild word for what Feolane felt for her, and the woman must know Egwene hardly saw her as a potential friend. If they had accepted either sitter's arrangement, mentioning the offer might be a good means of disarming her suspicions. Mother, Feolane said, and stopped, looking surprised at herself. It was the first time she had addressed Egwene so. Drawing a deep breath, she went on. Mother, I know you must have a hard time believing us since we've never held the oath rod, but I wish you would stop bringing that up, Egwene said. It was well to be careful, but she could not afford to refuse every offer of help for fear of plots. Do you think everybody believes Aes Sedai because of the 3 oaths? People who know Aes Sedai know a sister can stand truth on its head and turn it inside out if she chooses to. Myself, I think the 3 oaths hurt as much as they help, maybe more. I will believe you until I learn you've lied to me, and I will trust you until you show you don't deserve it, the same way everybody else does with one another. Come to think of it, the oaths did not really change that. You still had to take a sister on trust most of the time. The oaths just made people warier about it, wondering whether and how they were being manipulated. Another thing. You two are Aes Sedai. I don't want to hear any more about having to be tested or hold the oath rod or any of it. Bad enough you have to face that nonsense without parroting it yourselves. Have I made myself clear? The 2 women standing on the other side of the table murmured hastily that she had, then exchanged long looks. This time it was Feolane who appeared indecisive. Finally, Theodrin glided around to kneel beside Egwene's chair and kiss her ring. Under the light and by my hope of salvation and rebirth, I, Theodrin Dabai, swear fealty to you, Egwene Alvir, to faithfully serve and obey on pain of my life and honor. She looked at Egwene questioningly. It was all Egwene could do to nod. This was no part of Aes Sedai ritual. This was how nobles swore to ruler. Even some rulers did not receive so strong an oath. Yet no sooner had Theodrin risen with a relieved smile than Feolane took her place. Under the light and by my hope of salvation and rebirth, I, Feolane Orunda. All that she could have wished for and more. From many other sisters, at least, who were not just as likely to be sent to fetch another's dust cloak if the wind rose. When Feolane finished, she remained kneeling, but quickly upright. Mother, there is the matter of my penance. For what I said to you about not liking you, I will set it myself if you wish, but it is your right. Her voice was as rigid as her posture, yet not at all fearful. She looked ready to stare down a lion, eager to, in fact. Biting her lip, Egwene nearly laughed aloud. Keeping her face smooth took effort. Maybe they would take it for a hiccup. However much they claimed they were not really Aes Sedai, Feolane had just proved how much of one she was. Sometimes sisters set themselves penances in order to maintain the proper balance between pride and humility. That balance was much prized, supposedly, and the only reason given, usually. But certainly none sought to have one imposed. Penance set by another could be quite hard, and the Amelin was supposed to be harder in this than the Ajahs. Either way, though, many sisters made a haughty display of submission to the greater will of the Aes Sedai, an arrogant showing of their lack of arrogance. The pride of humility, Swan called it. She considered telling the woman to eat a handful of soap just to see her expression. Fairlane had a mean tongue. But instead, I don't hand out penance for telling the truth, daughter, or for not liking me. Dislike to your heart's content, so long as you keep your oath. Not that anyone except a dark friend would break that particular oath. Still, there were ways around almost anything. But weak sticks were better than none when you were fending off a bear. Fairlane's eyes widened, and Egwene sighed as she motioned the woman to rise. Had their positions been reversed, Fairlane would have put her nose firmly in the dust. I'm setting you two tasks to begin, daughters, she went on. They listened carefully, Fairlane not even blinking, Theodrin with a thoughtful finger to her lips. And this time when she dismissed them, they said, As you command, mother, in unison as they curtsied. Egwene's good mood was fleeting, though. Mary arrived with her breakfast on a tray as Theodrin and Faelane departed, and when Egwene thanked her for the rose-petal pomander, she said, I had a few spare moments, mother. By her expression, that could have been an accusation that Egwene worked her too hard, or that she herself did not work hard enough. Not a pleasant spice for the stewed fruit. For that matter, the woman's face might sour the mint tea and turn the warm, crusty bun hard as a rock. Egwene sent her away before eating. The tea was weak, anyway. Tea was one of the things in short supply. The note that had been under the inkwell proved no better seasoning. Nothing of interest in the dream, said Swan's fine script. So Swan had been in Tel Aranriod last night, too. She did a good deal of spying there. It mattered little whether she had been hunting some sign of Moghedien, though that would have been insanely foolish, or something else. Nothing was nothing. Egwene grimaced, and not just for the nothing. Swan in Tel Aranriod last night meant a visit from Lyanna sometime today, complaining. Swan most definitely no longer was allowed any of the dream Terangrial, not since she had tried to teach some of the other sisters about the world of dreams. It was not so much that she knew little more than they, or even that few sisters believed they actually needed a teacher to learn anything, but Swan possessed a tongue like a rasp and no patience. Usually she managed to hold her temper, but two outbursts of shouting and fist-shaking, and she'd been fortunate just to find herself denied access to the Terangrial. Lyanna was given one whenever she asked, though, and frequently Swan used it in secret. That was one of the few real bones of contention between them. Both would have been in Tel Aranriod every night if they could. With a grimace, Egwene channeled the tiniest spark of fire to set a corner of the parchment alight, and held it until it burned nearly to her fingers. Nothing left to be found by anyone rooting through her belongings, and reported where it would rouse suspicions. Breakfast almost done, she was still alone, and that was not usual. Shiriam might well be avoiding her, but Swan should have been there. Popping a last bit of the bun into her mouth and washing it down with a final swallow of tea, she rose to go find her, only to have the object of her intended search stalk into the tent. Had Swan had a tail, she would have been lashing it. Where have you been? Egwene demanded, weaving a ward against listeners. Aeldine pulled me out of my blankets first thing, Swan growled, dropping onto one of the stools. She still thinks she'll pump the Amerlin's eyes and ears out of me. No one gets that. No one. When Swan had first arrived in Salidar, a stilled woman on the run, a deposed Amerlin the world thought dead, the sisters might well not have let her stay, except that she knew not only the Amerlin seat's network of agents, but also that of the Blue Aja, which she had run before being raised to the stole. That had given her a certain influence, just as Lyanna's agents inside Tar Valon had given her some. The arrival of Aeldine Stonebridge, who had taken her place with the blue eyes and ears, had changed matters for Swan. Aeldine had been outraged that reports from the handful of blue agents Swan had managed to reach had been handed to women outside the Aja. That Aeldine's own position had been revealed. Only 2 or 3 sisters were supposed to know, even within the blue. Infuriated her to near apoplexy. She not only snatched back control of the Blue Network, not only upbraided Swan
Hey,
in a voice
Christopher,
that
how
might
you
have been heard a
doing?
mile off, she very nearly went for Swan's throat. Aildeen was from an Andorran mining village in the mountains of Mist, and it was said her crooked nose came from fighting with her fists when she was a girl. Aildeen's actions had started others thinking. Egwene returned to her unsteady chair and pushed her breakfast tray aside. Aildeen won't take it away from you, Swan, and neither will anyone else.
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
When Aildeen reclaimed the blue eyes and ears, others had begun thinking that the blue should not have the Amerlins as well. No one suggested that it should be in Egwene's control. The Hall was to have it, so Romonda said, and Lelaine. Each intended to be the one in charge, of course, the one those reports came to first, for being first to know had advantages. Aildeen thought those agents should be added to the Blue Network since Swan was blue. At least Shiriam was content simply to be handed all the reports Swan received, which she usually was. They can't make you give it up. Egwene filled her teacup again, setting it and the blue-glazed honey pot on the corner of the table nearest Swan, but the other woman only stared at them. The anger had gone out of her. She slumped on the stool. You never really think about strength, she said, half to herself. You're aware of it, whether you're stronger than somebody else, but you don't think about it. You just know that she defers to you or you to her. There was no one stronger than me before. No one since. Her eyes dropped to her hands, stirring uneasily on her lap. Sometimes when Romonda is hammering at me or Lelaine, it suddenly hits me like a gale. They're so far above me now, I should be holding my tongue until they give me permission to speak.
Not too
Even
bad.
Aildane
Can't
is, and
complain.
she's no more than middling. She forced her head upright, mouth tight and voice bitter. I suppose I'm adjusting to reality. That's ingrained in us too, driven deep before you ever test for the shawl, but I don't like it. I don't. Egwene picked up her pen from beside the inkwell and the sand jar, fiddling with it while she chose words. Swan, you know how I feel about what needs to be changed. There's too much we do because Aes Sedai have always done it that way. But things are changing. No matter who believes it will all go back to how it was. I doubt anyone else was ever raised Amerlin without being Aes Sedai first. That should have elicited a comment on the White Tower's hidden records. Swan often said there was nothing that had not occurred at least once in the Tower's history, though this did seem to be a first. But Swan sat there disheartened, like a sack. Swan, the Aes Sedai way isn't the only way, and not even always the best. I intend to make sure we follow the best way, and whoever can't learn to change, or won't, had better learn to live with it. Leaning across the table, she tried to make her expression encouraging. I never did figure out how wise ones determine precedence, but it isn't strength in the power. There are women who can channel, who defer to women who can't. One, Cerilia, would never have made it to accept it, yet even the strongest jump when she says toad. Wilders, Swan said dismissively, but it lacked force. Aes Sedai, then. I wasn't raised Amerlin because I am the strongest. The wisest women are chosen for the hall or to be ambassadors or advisors, the most skillful anyway, not those with the most strength. Best not to say skillful in what, though Swan certainly possessed those particular skills too. The hall? The hall might send me for tea. It might have me sweep out when they've finished sitting. Sitting back, Egwene threw down the pen. She wanted to shake the woman. Swan had kept going when she could not channel at all, and now her knees began to fold? Egwene was on the point of telling her about Theodrin and Phaelane. That should get some rise and approval, when she saw an olive-skinned woman ride past the open tent flaps, looking lost in thought beneath the wide gray hat she wore to keep off the sun. Swan, it's Mirella. Letting the ward go, she rushed outside. Mirella, she called. Swan
Oh,
needed
you
a
just
victory
woke
to
up.
wash the taste of being bullied out of her mouth, and this might be just the thing. Mirella was one of Shiriam's lot, and apparently with a secret all her own. Reining in her sorrel gelding, Mirella looked around, and gave a start when she saw Egwene. By her expression, the green sister had not realized what part of the camp she was passing through. A thin dust cloak hung down the back of her pale gray riding dress. "Mother," she said hesitantly, "if you will forgive me, I will not forgive you," Egwene cut in, making her flinch. Any doubt vanished that Marilla had heard about last night from Shiriam. "I will talk with you. Now." Swan had come outside, too, but instead of watching the sister climb uneasily from her saddle, she stared down the rows of tents toward a stocky, graying man with a battered breastplate strapped over his buff-colored coat, leading a tall bay in their direction. His presence was a surprise. Lord Bryn usually communicated with the hall by messenger, and his rare visits mostly finished before Egwene learned he had come. Swan assumed such a look of Aes Sedai's serenity it nearly made you forget her youthful face. Glancing briefly at Swan, Bryn made a leg, handling his sword with a spare grace. A weathered man, he was only moderately tall, but the way he carried himself made him seem taller. There was nothing flashy about him. The sweat on his broad face made him seem to be about a job of work. "Mother, may I speak with you? Alone?" Mirella turned as if to go, and Egwene snapped, "You stay right there, right where you are!" Mirella's mouth dropped open. Her surprise seemed as much for her own obedience as Egwene's decisive tone, and it faded into bitter resignation that she quickly hid behind a cool facade, one belied by the way she twiddled her reins. Bryn did not even blink, though Egwene was sure he at least had an inkling of her situation. She suspected that very little surprised him or unsettled him. Just the sight of him had made Swan ready to fight back. For all, it was apparently she who started most of their arguments.
No, it's just been
Already her
raining for a week.
fists
That's
rested on her
crazy.
hips, and her gaze was fixed on him, an auguring stare that should have made anyone uneasy,
That's a
even
lot of
had it
rain.
not come from an Aes Sedai. Mirella offered more than
Hopefully
helping
there's no
Swan, though.
flooding.
Perhaps. "I intended to ask you to come this afternoon, Lord Bryn. I ask now." She had questions to put to him. "We can talk then, if you will forgive me." Instead of accepting her dismissal, he said, "Mother, one of my patrols found something just before dawn. Something I think you should see for yourself. I can have an escort ready, and—" "No need for that," she broke in quickly. "Mirella, you will come with us. Swan, would you ask someone to bring my horse, please? Without delay." Riding out with Mirella would be better than confronting her here. Swan's patched together clues really pointed at anything, and on a ride she could ask Bryn her questions, but neither fueled her haste. She had just spotted Takima at her side. With one of the women who had been sitters before Swan was deposed had drifted to either Lelaine. Most of the newly chosen sitters went their own way, which was slightly better in Egwene's view. Just slightly. Even at a little distance, the set of Lelaine's shoulders was evident. She looked ready to walk through whatever got in her way. Swan saw her as well and darted off without pausing for so much as see. Yet there was no time to make a clean escape, short of leaping onto Lord Bryn's horse. Lelaine planted herself in front of Egwene, but it was Bryn she fixed with eyes sharp as tacks, considering, calculating what he was doing there. She had larger fish to put on the fire, though. "I must speak with the Amerlin," she said peremptorily, pointing toward Mirella. "You will wait. I will talk to you after." Bryn bowed, not too deeply, and led his horse where she pointed. Men who had any brains at all soon learned arguments did little good with Aes Sedai, and with sitters the tally was usually none. Before Lelaine could open her mouth, Romonda was suddenly there, radiating command so strongly that at first Egwene did not even notice Varelin with her, and the slender red-haired sitter for the Grey was inches taller than most men. The only surprise was that Romonda had not appeared sooner. She and Lelaine watched one another like hawks, neither allowing the other near Egwene alone. The glow of Saidar surrounded both women at the same instant, and each wove a ward around the five of them to stop eavesdropping. Their eyes clashed, challenging in faces utterly cool and collected, but neither let her ward drop. Egwene bit her tongue. In a public place, it was up to the strongest sister present to decide whether a conversation should be warded, and protocol said the Amerlin made that decision wherever she was present. She had no desire for the not quite apologies mentioned it would bring, though. If she pressed, they would exceed, of course, while behaving as though soothing a petulant toddler. She bit her tongue and boiled inside. Where was Swan? That was not fair. Getting horses saddled required more than moments. She wanted to grip her skirts to keep her hands away from her head. Romanda dropped the staring match first, though not in defeat. She rounded on Egwene so suddenly that Lelaine was left staring past her and looking foolish. Lana is making trouble again. Her high-pitched voice was almost sweet, but it held a sharpness that emphasized the lack of any title of respect. Romanda's hair was completely gray, gathered in a neat bun on the nape of her neck, but age had certainly not softened her. Takima, with her long black hair and aged ivory complexion, had been almost 9 years a brown sitter, as forceful in the hall as in the classroom, yet she stood a meek pace back, hands folded at her waist. Romanda led her faction as firmly as Cerelia. She was one to whom strength was indeed all important, and in truth Lelaine seemed not far behind. She plans to lay a proposal before the hall, Lelaine put in sourly, refusing to look at Romanda at all now. Agreeing with the other woman certainly pleased her as little as speaking second. Aware that she had gained an edge, Romanda smiled, a faint curving of her lips. About what? Egwene asked, playing for time. She was certain she knew. It was very hard not to sigh. It was very hard not to rub her temples. Why, the Black Aja, of course, Mother, Varalyn replied, lifting her head as if surprised at the question. Well, she might be. Delana was rabid on the subject. She wants the Hall to condemn Elida openly as black. She stopped abruptly when Lelaine raised a hand. Lelaine allowed her followers more leeway than Romanda, or maybe she just did not have as tight a grip. You must speak with her, Mother. Lelaine had a warm smile when she chose to use it. Swan said they had been friends once. Lelaine had accepted her back with some version of welcome, yet Egwene thought that smile a practiced tool. And say what? Her hands ached to soothe her head. These two each made sure the hall passed only what she wanted, certainly little that Egwene suggested, with the result that nothing much at all was passed, and they wanted her to intercede with a sitter. Delana did support her proposals, true, when they suited her. Delana was a weather vane, turning with the last breath of air to pass, and if she turned in Egwene's direction a great deal of late, it did not mean very much. The Black Aja seemed her only fixed point. What was keeping Swan? Tell her she must stop, Mother. Lelaine's smile and tone made her seem to be counseling a daughter. This foolishness, worse than foolishness, has everyone at daggers' points. Some of the sisters are even beginning to believe, Mother. It will not be long before the notion spreads to the servants and the soldiers. The look she directed toward Bryn was full of doubt. Bryn appeared to be attempting to chat with Cinderella, who was staring at the warded group and running her reins uneasily through her gloved hands. Believing what is plain is hardly foolish, Romanda barked. Mother, in her mouth, that sounded entirely too much like girl. The reason Delana must be stopped is she does no good and considerable harm. Perhaps Elida is black, though I have strong doubts, whatever second-hand gossip that trollop Halima brought. Elida is wrong-headed to a fault, but I cannot believe her evil. Yet even if she is, trumpeting it will make outsiders suspicious of every Aes Sedai and drive the black into deeper hiding. There are methods to dig them out if we don't frighten them into flight. Lelaine's sniff bordered on a snort. Even were this nonsense true, no self-respecting sister would submit to your methods, Romanda. What you've suggested is close to being put to the question. Egwene blinked in confusion. Neither Swan nor Lyanna had brought her a whisper of this. Luckily, the sitters were not paying her enough mind to notice, as usual. Planting her fists on her hips, Romanda squared around on Lelaine. Desperate days demand desperate actions. Some might ask why anyone would put dignity ahead of exposing the Dark One's servants. That sounds dangerously near an accusation, Lelaine said, eyes narrowing. Romanda was the one smiling now, a cold, flinty smile. I will be the first to submit to my methods, Lelaine, if you are the second. Lelaine actually growled, taking half a step toward the other woman, and Romanda leaned toward her, chin thrust out. They looked ready to begin pulling hair and rolling in the dirt, and Aes Sedai dignity be hanged. Varlin and Takima glared at one another like two maidservants supporting their mistresses, a long-legged wading bird in a scowling match with a wren. The whole lot of them seemed to have forgotten Egwene entirely. Swan came running up in a broad straw hat, leading a fat dun mare with white-stockinged hind legs, and skidded to a halt when she saw the warded gathering. One of the grooms was with her, a lanky fellow in a long frayed vest and a patched shirt, holding the reins of a tall roan. The wards were invisible to him, but Saidar did not hide the faces. His eyes went very wide, and he began licking his lips. For that matter, passers-by walked wide around the tent and pretended to see nothing. Aes Sedai, warders, and servants alike. Bryn alone frowned and studied them as though wondering what was hidden from his ears. Mirella was retying her saddlebags, plainly on the point of leaving. When you have decided what I should say, Egwene announced, then I can decide what to do. They really had forgotten her. All four stared at her in amazement as she walked between Romanda and Lelaine and out through the doubled wards. There was nothing to feel as she brushed by the weave, of course. They had never been made to stop anything as solid as a human body. When she scrambled onto the roan, Mirella drew a deep breath and emulated her in resignation. The wards had vanished, though the glow still enveloped the two sitters, each more the image of frustration than the other as they stood watching. Hurriedly, Egwene donned the thin linen dust cloak that had been draped in front of her gelding saddle and the riding gloves that were tucked into a small pocket in the cloak. A wide-brimmed hat hung from the saddle's high pommel, deep blue to match her dress, with a spray of white plumes pinned slanting across the front that shouted of Chase's hand. Heat she could ignore, but the glare of the sun was another matter. Removing plumes and pin, she tucked them into the saddlebags, put the hat on her head, and tied the ribbons beneath her chin. Shall we go, Mother? Bryn asked. He was already mounted, the helmet that had been hanging from his saddle now obscuring his face behind steel bars. It looked quite natural on him, as though he had been born for armor. She nodded. There was no attempt to stop them. Lelaine would not stoop to shouting halt in public, of course, but Romanda... Egwene felt a sense of relief as they rode away, yet her head seemed to be splitting. What was she to do about Delana? What could she do? The main road in this area, a wide stretch of dirt packed so hard nothing could raise dust from it, ran through the army's camp and along the gap between that and the Aes Sedai's. Bryn angled across it, through the rest of the army on the other side. Although the army camp held 30 times or more as many people as the Aes Sedai camp, there seemed to be few more tents than for the sisters and those who served them, all scattered out across the flats and up the hillsides. Most of the soldiers slept in the open. But then it was hard to remember the last time rain had fallen, and there certainly was not a cloud to be seen. Strangely, there were more women than in the sisters' camp, though they seemed fewer at first glance among so many men. Cooks tended kettles, and laundresses attacked great heaps of clothing, while some worked with the horses or wagons. A fair number appeared to be wives. At least they sat about knitting or darning dresses or shirts, or stirring small cookpots. Armorers had set up almost anywhere she looked, hammers making steel ring on their anvils, and fletchers adding arrows to bundles by their feet, and farriers checking horses. Wagons of every sort and size stood everywhere, hundreds, perhaps thousands. The army seemed to scoop up every one it found along its path. Most of the foragers were already out, but a few high-wheeled carts and lumbering wagons still trundled away in search of farms and villages. Here and there, soldiers raised a cheer as they rode by. Lord Bryn, and the bull, the bull. That was his sigil. Nothing about Aes Sedai or the Amelin seat. Egwene twisted around in her saddle to make sure Mirella was still close behind. She was, letting her horse follow on its own, a far-off, slightly sickly expression on her face. Swan had taken a position at the rear, shepherd to their lone sheep. Then again, she might just have been afraid to urge her mount ahead. The dun was positively a butterball, but Swan would probably treat a pony like a warhorse. Egwene felt a stab of irritation at her own animal. His name was Daishar, glory in the old tongue. She would much rather be riding Bella, a shaggy little mare not much slimmer than Swan's dun that she had ridden out of the two rivers. Sometimes she thought she must look a doll, perched atop a gelding that could be taken for a warhorse. But the Amerlin had to have a proper mount. No shaggy cart horses. Even if this rule was of her own making, she felt as confined as a novice. Turning in the saddle, she said, "Do you expect any opposition ahead, Lord Bryn?" He glanced at her sideways. She had asked the same once before, leaving Salidar, and twice while crossing Altara. Not enough to rouse suspicions, she thought. Burundi is like Altara, Mother. Neighbor too busy scheming against neighbor or outright fighting him to band together for anything short of a war, and not to any great degree then. His tone was very dry. He had been Captain General of the Queen's Guards in Andor, with years of border skirmishes against the Mirandians behind him. Andor will be another matter, I fear. I'm not looking forward to that. He turned another way, climbing a gentle slope to avoid 3 wagons rumbling over rocks in the same direction. Egwene tried not to grimace. Andor. Before, he had just said no. These were the tail end of the Cumbar Hills, somewhat south of Lugard, the capital of Murundi. Even if they were lucky, the border of Andor lay at least 10 days ahead. And when we reach Tarvalon, Lord Bryn, how do you plan to take the city? No one has asked me that yet, Mother. She had only thought his voice was dry before. Now it was dry. By the time we reach Tarvalon, the light willing, I'll have 2 or 3 times as many men as I do now. Egwene winced at the idea of paying so many soldiers. He did not seem to notice. With that, I will lay siege. The hardest part will be finding ships and sinking them to block North Harbor and South Harbor. The harbors are as much the key as holding the bridge towns, Mother. Tarvalon is larger than Cairhien and Caemlyn together. Once food stops going in, he shrugged. Most of soldiering is waiting, when it isn't marching. And if you don't have that many soldiers? She had never thought of all those people going hungry, women and children. She had never really thought of anyone being involved except the Aes Sedai and the soldiers. How could she have been so foolish? She had seen the results of war in Cairhien. Bryn seemed to take it so lightly. But then he was a soldier. Privation and death must be every day to soldiers. What if you only have, say, what you do now? Siege? Apparently some of what they had been saying had finally broken into whatever Mirella was thinking. She booted the sorrel forward, making a number of men jump aside, some falling on their faces. A few opened their mouths angrily, then saw her ageless features and shut their jaws again, glowering. They might as well not have existed for all of her. Arthur Hawkwing besieged Tarvalon for 20 years and failed. Abruptly, she realized ears were about and lowered her voice, but it was still acid. Do you expect us to wait 20 years? That acid washed over Gareth Bryn without leaving a stain. Would you prefer direct assault right off, Miralicidai? He could have been asking whether she wanted her tea sweet or bitter. Several of Hawkwing's generals tried, and their men were slaughtered. No army has ever managed to breach Tarvalon's walls. That was not strictly true, Egwene knew. In the Trolloc Wars, an army of Dreadlord-led Trollocs had actually plundered and burned a part of the White Tower itself. At the end of the War of the Second Dragon, an army trying to rescue Gwair Amalasan before he was gentled had reached the tower too. Mirella could not know, though, much less Bryn. Access to those secret histories hidden deep in the tower library was set out in a law that was itself secret, and revealing the existence of either records or law was treason. Swan said if you read between the lines, you found hints of things that had not been recorded even there. Aes Sedai were very good at hiding truth when they thought it necessary, even from themselves. With 100,000, or what I have now, Bryn continued, I will be the first, if I can block the harbors. Hawkwing's generals never managed that. The Aes Sedai always raised those iron chains in time to stop the ships getting into the harbor mouth and sank them before they could be placed to hinder trade. Food and supplies got in. It will come to your assault eventually, but not until the city's weakened, if I have my way. His voice was still ordinary, a man discussing an outing. His head turned toward Mirella, and though his tone did not change, the intensity in his eyes was evident even behind his face guard. And you all agreed I would when it came to the army. I won't throw men away. Mirella opened her mouth, then closed it slowly. Plainly she wanted to say something, but did not know what. They had given their word, she and Shiriam and those who had been running things when he appeared in Salidar, however much giving it galled. However much the sitters tried to get round it. They had given no word. Bryn acted as though they had, though, and so far he had managed to get away with it. So far. Egwene felt ill. She had seen war. Images flashed in her head, men fighting, killing their way through the streets of Tar Valon, dying. Her eyes fell on a square-jawed fellow chewing his tongue while he sharpened a pikehead. Would he die in those streets? The grizzled, balding man running his fingers so carefully down each arrow before sliding the shaft into his quiver. And there, that lad swaggering in his high riding boots. He looked too young to shave. Light. So many were boys. How many would die? For her. For justice. For the right. For the world. But at the heart, for her. Swan raised her hand, but did not complete the gesture. Had she been close enough, she could not pat the Amerlin seat on the shoulder where everyone could see. Egwene straightened her back. Lord Bryn, she said in a tight voice, what is it you want me to see? She thought he half glanced at Mirella before answering. Better you see it for yourself, Mother. Egwene thought her head might break open. If Swan's clues led to anything at all, she might just skin Mirella. If they did not, she might skin Swan. And she might throw Gareth Bryn in for good measure. Chapter 12. A Morning of Victory. The crooked hills and ridges surrounding the camp showed every sign of the drought and unseasonable heat. The unholy heat, in truth. Even the dullest scullion scrubbing pots saw the Dark One's touch on the world. The true forest lay behind them to the west, but twisted oaks grew out of the rocky slopes, sour gums and pines of unfamiliar shape, and trees Egwene had no names for, brown and yellow and bare-branched. Not winter bare or brown. Starved for moisture and coolness, dying if the weather did not change soon. Beyond the last of the soldiers, a river ran off south and west, the Rysandrella, 20 paces wide and flanked on either side by hard-baked mud studded with stones. Swirling around rocks that might have made crossing hazardous in other days, the water rose short of the horses' knees as they forded. Egwene felt her own problems dwindle in size. Despite her head, she offered a small prayer for Nynaeve and Elaine. Their search was as important as anything she did. More. The world would live if she failed, but they had to succeed. They traveled southward at an easy canter, slowing when the hillside slant of the land grew too great, or the horses had to climb any distance through trees and sparse scrub, but keeping to the lowland as much as possible and covering ground quickly. Bryn's big-nosed gelding, sure-footed and strong, hardly seemed to mind which way the ground tilted, or whether smooth or rough, yet Daishar kept pace easily. Sometimes Swan's plump animal labored, though she might just have been picking up her rider's anxiety. No amount of practice could make Swan anything but a terrible rider, nearly throwing her arms around the mare's neck climbing upslope, almost falling from the saddle going down, awkward as a duck afoot on the flats, and not far from wide-eyed as the horse. Mirella actually regained some of her humor watching Swan. Her own white-footed sorrel picked her way in delicate swoops like a swallow, and Mirella rode with an assurance and flair that made Bryn appear stolid and workmanlike. Before they had gone very far, riders appeared atop a high ridge to the west, perhaps 100 men in column, the rising sun glinting off breastplates and helmets and lance points. At their heads streamed a long white pennant Egwene could not make out, but she knew it bore the red hand. She had not expected to see them so close to the Aes Sedai camp. Dragon-sworn animals, Mirella muttered, watching the horsemen parallel their route. Her gloved hands tightened on her reins, with fury, not fear. The band of the Red Hand puts out patrols, Bryn said placidly. With a glance at Egwene, he added, Lord Talmanas seems concerned about you, Mother, last I spoke to him. He put no more emphasis on that than the other. You've spoken with him? Every vestige of Mirella's serenity vanished. The anger she had to hold in with Egwene she could safely unleash on him. She all but shook with it. That is very close to treason, Lord Bryn. It might well be treason. Swan had been dividing her attention between her horse and the men on the ridge, and she did not look at Mirella, but she stiffened. No one had tied the band and treason together before. They rounded a bend in the hill valley. A farm clung to a hillside, or what had been a farm once. One wall of the small stone house had collapsed, and a few charred timbers stuck up beside the soot-coated chimney like grimy fingers. The roofless barn was a blackened, hollow box of stone, and scattered ash marked where sheds might once have stood. All across Altara they had seen as bad and worse, entire villages sometimes, the dead lying in the streets, food for ravens and foxes and feral dogs that fled when people came close. Stories of anarchy and murder in Tarabon and Arad Doman suddenly had flesh and bones. Many men seized any excuse to turn bandit or settle old grudges. Egwene hoped fervently it was so. But the name on every survivor's lips was dragon-sworn, and the sisters blamed Rand as surely as if he had carried the torches himself. They would use him still if they could, though, control him if they found a way. She was not the only Aes Sedai to believe in doing what she must, even when she had to hold her nose. Mirella's anger affected Bryn as little as rain affected a boulder. Egwene had a sudden image of storms whirling about his head and floodwaters swirling around his knees while he just kept striding ahead. Mirella Sedai, he said with the calm she should have known. When 10,000 men or more are shadowing my back trail, I want to know what their intentions are, especially this particular 10,000 or more. This was a dangerous topic. However happy Egwene was that they were past questions of Talmana's concern over her, she should have been grinding her teeth that he had mentioned her at all, but she was so startled she sat bolt upright in her saddle. 10,000? Are you sure? The band had had little more than half that when Mat brought it to Salidar, hunting her and Elaine. Bryn merely shrugged. I gather recruits as I go, and so does he. Not as many, but some men have notions about serving Aes Sedai. More people than not would have been distinctly uneasy, saying that to three sisters. He said it with a wry smile. Besides, it seems the band has a certain reputation from the fighting in Cairhien. The tale is, Shen and Kalhar never loses, whatever the odds. That was what drove men to join, here as back in Altara, the thought that two armies must mean a battle. Trying to stand aside might end as hard as choosing the wrong side. At best, there would be no pickings for neutrals. I've had a few deserters to my ranks from Talmanas' newlings. Some seem to think the band's luck is tied up in Mat Cawthon and can't be there without him. Something close to a sneer twisted Mirella's lips. These fool Mirandians' fears are certainly useful, but I did not think you were a fool too. Talmanas follows us because he fears we might turn against his precious Lord Dragon. But if he truly intended to attack, don't you think he would have by now? These dragon-sworn can be dealt with once more important matters are done. Communicating with him, however. Giving herself a shake, she managed to regain her serenity, on the surface at least. Her tone could still have scorched wood. You mark me, Lord Bryn. Egwene let Mirella's words pass her by. Bryn had looked at her when he mentioned Mat. The sisters thought they knew the situation with the band and Mat, and did not think on it much, but Bryn apparently did. Tilting her head so the brim of her hat obscured her face, She studied him from the corner of her eye. He was oath-bound to build the army and lead it until Elida was brought down. But why had he sworn? Surely he could have found some lesser oath, and it surely would have been accepted by sisters who only thought to use all those soldiers as a full-day mask to frighten Elida. Having him on their side was comforting. Even the other Aes Sedai seemed to feel that. Like her father, he was the sort of man who made you believe there was no cause for panic, whatever the situation. Having him oppose her, she realized suddenly, might be as bad as having the Hall against her, and never mind the army. The one approving comment Swan had ever had of him was that he was formidable, even if she did try to change her remark immediately to mean something else. Any man Swan Sanche thought formidable was one to be mindful of. They splashed across a tiny stream, a rivulet that barely wet the horses' hooves. A bedraggled crow, feeding on a fish that had stranded itself in water too shallow to swim, fluttered its tattered wings on the edge of flight, then settled back to its meal. Swan was also studying Bryn. The mare made much easier going when she forgot to saw at the reins or dig her heels in at just the wrong moment. Egwene had asked her about Lord Bryn's motives, but Swan's own tangled connection to the man left her little except acid when it came to him. She either hated Gareth Bryn to his boot soles or loved him, and imagining Swan in love was like imagining that crow swimming. The ridgeline where the band's soldiers had been showed only cockeyed lines of dead conifers now. She had not noticed them going. Matt had a reputation as a soldier? Crows swimming did not come close. She had believed he commanded only because of Rand, and that had been hard enough to swallow. Believing because you think you know is dangerous, she reminded herself, eyeing Bryn. Should be flogged. Mirella's voice still burned. I warn you, if I hear that you've met with this dragon-sworn again. Rain washing over that boulder, as far as Bryn was concerned, or so it seemed. He rode easily, occasionally murmuring, "Yes, Mirella Sedai," or "No, Mirella Sedai," without any hint of distress, and without lessening the watch he kept on the countryside. No doubt he had seen the soldiers leave. However he mustered the patience, Egwene was sure fear was no part of it. She was in no mood to listen to that. Be quiet, Mirella. No one is going to do anything to Lord Bryn. Rubbing her temple, she thought of asking one of the sisters back in the camp for healing. Neither Swan nor Mirella had much ability there. Not that healing would do any good if it was just lack of sleep and worry. Not that she wanted whispers spreading that the strain was growing too great for her. Besides, there were other ways to deal with headaches than healing, although not here. Mirella's mouth tightened only for an instant. With a toss of her head, she turned her face away, color in her cheeks, and Bryn suddenly appeared absorbed in examining a red-winged hawk, wheeling off to their left. Even a brave man could know when to be discreet. Folding its wings, the hawk plummeted toward unseen prey behind a stand of bedraggled leather leaves. Egwene felt that way, swooping on targets she could not see, hoping she had chosen the right one, hoping there was a target there. She drew breath, wishing it were steadier. Just the same, Lord Bryn, I think it's best you don't meet Talmanas again. Surely you know as much of his intentions as you need by this time. Light send Talmanas had not said too much already. A pity she could not send Swan or Lyanna to caution him if he would take it, but given feelings among the sisters, she might as well risk going to see Rand. Bryn bowed in his saddle. As you command, Mother. There was no mockery in his tone. There never was. He had obviously learned to school his voice around Aes Sedai. Swan hung back, frowning at him. Perhaps she could dig out where his loyalties lay. For all her animosity, she spent a great deal of time in his company, much more than she absolutely had to. With an effort, Egwene kept her hands on Daishar's reins, away from her head. How much further, Lord Bryn? Keeping impatience from her voice was more difficult. Just a little way, Mother. For some reason, he halfway turned his head to look at Mirella. Not far now. Increasingly, farms dotted the region, as many clinging to hillsides as on the flats, though the Emmons fielder in Egwene said that made no sense. Low gray stone houses and barns, and unfenced pastures with a few slat-ribbed cows, and sad-looking black-tailed sheep. Not all had been burned by far, only one here and one there. Supposedly the burnings were to let the others know what would happen if they did not declare for the Dragon Reborn. At one farm she saw some of Lord Bryn's foragers with a wagon. That they were his was plain as much by the way he eyed them and nodded as by the lack of a white pennant. The band always flaunted itself. Aside from the banners, some had of late taken to wearing a red scarf tied around the arm. Half a dozen cattle and maybe 2 dozen sheep lowed and baaed under the guard of men on horseback, and other men toted sacks from barn to wagon past a slump-shouldered farmer and his family, a sullen lot in dark, rough woolens. One of the little girls, wearing a deep bonnet like the others, had her face pressed to her mother's skirts, apparently crying. Some of the boys had their fists clenched, as if they wanted to fight. The farmer would be paid, but if he could not really spare what was taken, if he had had a mind to resist close on 20 men in breastplates and helmets, those burned farms would have given him pause. Quite often Bryn's soldiers found charred corpses in the ruins, men and women and children who had died trying to get out. Sometimes the doors and windows had been sealed up from outside. Egwene wondered whether there was any way to convince the farmers and villagers that there was a difference between the brigands and the army. She wanted to very much, but she did not see how, short of letting her own soldiers go hungry until they deserted. If the sisters could see no difference between the brigands and the band, there seemed no hope for the country folk. As the farm dwindled behind them, she resisted the urge to twist around in her saddle and look back. Looking would change nothing. Lord Bryn was as good as his word. Perhaps 3 or 4 miles from the camp, 3 or 4 in a straight line, twice that over the country they had crossed, they rounded the shoulder of a hill spotted with brush and trees, and he drew rein. The sun stood almost halfway to its crest now. Another road ran below, narrower and much more winding than the one through the camp. They had the idea traveling by night would take them safe past the bandits, he said. Not a bad notion, as it turns out, or else they've just had the Dark One's own luck. They've come from Camelin. A merchant train of some 50 large wagons behind teams of 10 or so lay stretched out along the road, halted under the eyes of more of Bryn's soldiers. A few of the soldiers were afoot, supervising the transfer of barrels and bags from the merchants' wagons to half a dozen of their own. One woman in a plain dark dress waved her arms and pointed vigorously to this item or that, either protesting or bargaining, but her fellows stood in a glum, silent knot. A short way farther up the road, grim fruit decorated the spreading limbs of an oak, men hanging by the neck from every bare branch. Bare except for crows, almost enough to make the tree seem leaved in black. They had larger than fish to feed on, these birds. Even at a distance, it was not a sight to ease Egwene's head or her stomach. This what you wanted me to see? The merchants or the bandits? She could not see a dress on any of those dangling corpses, and when the bandits hanged people, they included women and children. Anyone could have put the corpses there, Bryn's soldiers, the band. That the band hanged any of the so-called dragon-sworn they caught made little difference to the sisters, or even some local lord or lady. Had the Murandian nobles worked together, all the brigands might have hung from trees by now, but that was like asking cats to dance. He had said Camelin. Is it something to do with Rand? Or the Ashaman? This time he looked from her to Mirella and back quite openly. Mirella's hat cast shadows on her face. She appeared sunk in gloom, sagging in her saddle, and not at all the confident rider she had been earlier. He seemed to reach a decision. I thought you should hear before anybody else did, but perhaps I misunderstood. He eyed Mirella again. Hear what, you hairy-eared lump? Swan growled, thumping the fat mare closer with her heels. Egwene made a soothing gesture toward her. Mirella can hear anything I do, Lord Bryn. She has my complete trust. The Green Sister's head jerked around. From her stricken look, anyone would doubt they had heard Egwene correctly, but after a moment Bryn nodded. I see that matters have changed. Yes, Mother. Removing his helmet, he set it on the pommel of his saddle. He still seemed reluctant, picking his words with care. Merchants carry rumors the way dogs do fleas, and that lot down there has a fine crop. I don't say any of it is true, of course, but it was odd seeing him so hesitant. Mother, one tale that caught them up on the road is that Randall Thor has gone to the White Tower and sworn fealty to Elida. For a moment, Mirella and Swan looked much alike, blood draining from their faces as they envisioned catastrophe. Mirella actually swayed in her saddle. For a moment, Egwene could only stare at him. Then she startled herself and the others by bursting out laughing. Dishar danced in surprise, and settling him on the rocky slope settled her nerves as well. Lord Bryn, she said, patting the gelding's neck, that isn't so, believe me. I know it for a fact, as of last night. Swan heaved an instant sigh, and Mirella was only a heartbeat behind. Egwene felt like laughing again at their expressions. So incredibly relieved they were wide-eyed. Children who had been told the Shadow Man was not under the bed. Aes Sedai calm indeed. That's good to hear, Bryn said flatly. But even if I sent away every man down there, the tale will still reach my ranks. It will go through the army like wildfire crossing these hills. That cut her mirth short. That could be disaster left alone. I will have sisters announce the truth to your soldiers tomorrow. Will 6 Aes Sedai who know of themselves be enough? Mirella here and Shiriam, Carlinia and Beonin, Anaya and Morvrin? Those sisters would not like having to meet with the wise ones, but they would not be able to refuse her either. Would not want to, really, to stop this tale spreading. Should not want to, at least. Mirella's tiny wince was followed by a resigned twist of her mouth. Leaning an elbow on his helmet, Bryn studied Egwene and Mirella. He never so much as peeked at Swan. His bay stamped a hoof on the rocks, and a covey of some sort of dove with bright blue wings whirred into the air from beneath bushes a few paces away, making Dishar and Mirella's roan start skittishly. Bryn's mount did not stir. He had heard of the gateways, without doubt, though he surely knew nothing of what they were. Aes Sedai did keep secrets by habit, and had some hope of keeping that one from Elida, and he certainly knew nothing at all about Tel'aran Riod. That vital secret was easier to guard with no manifestations anyone could see, yet he did not ask how. Perhaps he was accustomed to Aes Sedai and secrets by now. So long as they say the words straight, he said at last. If they hedge even a hair. His stare was not an attempt to intimidate, just to drive the point home. He seemed satisfied by what he saw in her face. You do very well, it appears, Mother. I wish you continued success. Set your time for this afternoon, and I will come. We should confer regularly. I will come whenever you send for me. We should begin making firm plans how to put you on the Amerlin seat once we reach Tarvala. His tone was guarded. Very likely he still was not entirely sure what was going on or how far he could trust Mirella, and it took her a moment to realize what he had done. It made her breath catch. Maybe she was just becoming too used to the way Aes Sedai shaded words, but Bryn had just said the army was hers. She was sure of it. Not the Hall's, and not Shiriam's. Hers. Thank you, Lord Bryn. That seemed little enough, especially when his careful nod, his eyes steady on hers, seemed to confirm her belief. Suddenly she had 1,000 more questions, most of which she could not ask, even were they alone. A pity she could not take him into her confidence completely. Caution until you're sure, and then a little more caution. An old saying that applied very well to any dealings that brushed against Aes Sedai. And even the best men would talk things over with their friends, perhaps especially when things were supposed to be secret. I'm sure you have 1,000 details to see to, what's left of the morning, she said, gathering her reins. You go on back. We will ride a little more. Bryn protested, of course. He almost sounded like a warder, talking of the impossibility of watching every way at once and how an arrow in the back could kill an Aes Sedai as quickly as it could anyone else. The next man who told her that, she decided, was going to pay for it. 3 Aes Sedai were surely the equal of 300 men. In the end, for all his grumbles and grimaces, he had no choice but to obey. Donning his helmet, he started his horse down the uneven slope toward the merchant train, instead of back the way they had come, but that was even better from her point of view. "Will you lead the way, Swan?" she said when he was a dozen strides below. Swan glared after him as though he had been badgering her the whole time. With a snort, she tugged her straw hat straight, wheeled her mare around, well, dragged her around, and heeled the stout animal to a walk. Egwene motioned Mirella to follow. Like Bryn, the woman had no choice. At first, Mirella directed sidelong glances at her, plainly expecting her to bring up the sisters sent to the White Tower, plainly gathering excuses for why they had to be kept secret even from the hall. The longer Egwene rode in silence, the more uneasily the other shifted in her saddle. Mirella began wetting her lips, fine cracks spreading in that Aes Sedai calm. A very useful tool, silence. For a time, the only sounds were their horses' hooves and the occasional cry of a bird in the brush. But as Swan's direction became clear, angling a little west from the path back to the camp, Mirella's shifting increased until she might have been sitting on nettles. Maybe there was something to those bits and pieces Swan had gathered, after all. When Swan took another turn westward between two misshapen hills that bent toward each other, Mirella drew rein. There is a waterfall in that direction," she said, pointing east. "Not very large, even before the drought, but quite pretty even now." Swan stopped too, looking back with a small smile. What could Mirella be hiding? Egwene was curious. Glancing at the green sister, she gave a start at a single bead of perspiration on the woman's forehead, glistening in the shadow just at the edge of her wide gray hat. She most certainly wanted to know what could shake an Aes Sedai enough to make her sweat. "I think Swan's Way will offer even more interesting sights, don't you?" Egwene said, turning Daishar, and Mirella seemed to fold in on herself. "Come along." "You know everything, don't you?" Mirella muttered unsteadily as they rode between the leaning hills. More than one drop of sweat decorated her face now. She was shaken to the core. Everything. How could you... Suddenly she jerked upright in her saddle, staring at Swan's back. "Her! Swan's been your creature from the beginning." She sounded almost indignant. "How could we have been so blind? But I still don't understand. We were so circumspect." "If you want to keep something hidden," Swan said contemptuously over her shoulder, "don't try to buy coin peppers this far south." What in the world were coin peppers? And what were they talking about? Mirella shuddered. It was a measure of how upset she was that Swan's tone brought no quick snap to put the other woman in her place. Instead, she licked her lips as though they were suddenly very dry. "Mother, you have to understand why I did it. Why we did it." The frantic edge to her voice was fit for confronting half the Forsaken, and her shift. "Not just because Moraine asked. Not just because she was my friend. I hate letting them die. I hate it. The bargain we make is hard on us sometimes, but harder on them. You must understand. You must." Just when Egwene thought she was about to reveal everything, Swan halted her round mare again and faced them. Egwene could have slapped her. "It might go easier with you, Mirella, if you lead the rest of the way," she said coldly, disgustedly in fact. "Cooperation might mean mitigation. A little." "Yes," Mirella nodded, hands working incessantly on the reins. "Yes, of course." She looked on the point of tears as she took the lead. Swan, falling in behind, appeared relieved for just an instant. Egwene thought she herself was going to burst. What bargain? With whom? Letting who die? And who was we? Shiriam and the others? But Mirella would have heard, and exposing her own ignorance hardly seemed advisable at this point. An ignorant woman who keeps her mouth shut will be thought wise, the saying went. And there was another. Keeping the first secret always means keeping 10 more. There was nothing for it but to follow, holding everything in. Swan was going to get a talking to, though. The woman was not supposed to be keeping secrets from her. Grinding her teeth, Egwene tried to appear patient, unconcerned, wise. Almost back to the road the camp was on, a few miles to the west, Mirella led the way up a low, flat-topped hill covered with pine and leatherleaf. 2 huge oaks kept anything else from growing in the wide depression on the crown. Beneath thick intertwined branches stood 3 peaked tents of patched canvas and a picket line of horses, with a cart nearby, and 5 tall war horses, each carefully picketed away from the others. Nisao Dachan, in a simply cut bronze-colored riding dress, waited under the awning in front of one of the tents, as if to welcome guests, with Saren Huygen at her side in the olive-green coat so many of the Gaidin wore. A bald-headed stump of a man with a thick black beard, Nisao's warder still stood taller than she. A few paces away, 2 of Mirella's 3 Gaidin warily watched them descend into the hollow. Croy Macon, slender and yellow-haired, and Newell Dromond, dark and bulky, with a beard that left his upper lip bare. No one looked surprised in the least. Obviously, one of the warders had been keeping guard and given warning. Nothing in sight warranted all the secrecy, though, or Mirella's lip-licking. For that matter, if Nisao waited in welcome, why did her hands keep stroking her divided skirts? She looked as if she would rather face Elida while shielded. 2 women, peering around a corner of one of the tents, ducked back hurriedly, but not before Egwene recognized them. Nicola and Arena. Suddenly she felt very uneasy. What had Swan brought her to? Swan showed no nervousness at all as she dismounted. "Bring him out, Mirella. Now." She was getting her own back with a vengeance. Her tone made a file seem smooth. "It's too late for hiding." Mirella barely managed a frown at being addressed so, and it appeared an effort. Visibly pulling herself together, she jerked her hat from her head and climbed down without a word, glided to one of the tents and vanished inside. Nisao's already big eyes followed her, growing wider by the moment. She seemed frozen to the spot. No one but Swan was near enough to overhear. "Why did you break in?" Egwene demanded softly as she got down. "I'm sure she was about to confess, whatever it is, but I still don't have a clue. Coin peppers?" "Very popular in Shinar and Malkir," Swan said just as quietly. "I only heard that after I left Aelgene this morning. I had to make her lead the way. I didn't know it, not exactly. It would hardly have done much good to let her discover that now, would it? I didn't know about Nisao either. I thought they hardly ever spoke to one another." She glanced at the yellow sister and gave her head an irritated shake. A failure to learn something was a failure Swan did not tolerate well in herself. "Unless I've gone blind and stupid, what these 2—" Grimacing as though she had a mouthful of something rotten, she spluttered, trying to find a name to fit. Abruptly, she caught Egwene's sleeve. "Here they come. Now you'll see for yourself." Mirella left the tent first, then a man in just boots and breeches, who had to duck low through the door flaps, a bared sword in his hand and scars crisscrossing his lightly furred chest. He was head and shoulders and more taller than her, taller than any of the other warders. His long dark hair, held by a braided leather cord around his temples, was more streaked with gray than when Egwene had seen him last, but there was nothing at all soft in Lan Mandragoran. Pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place, yet it still would not come apart for her. He had been warder to Moiraine, the Aes Sedai who had brought her and Rand and the rest out of the 2 rivers what seemed an age ago. But Moiraine was dead, killing Lanfear, and Lan had gone missing in Cairhien right after. Maybe it was all clear to Swan. To her it was mostly mud. Murmuring something to Lan, Mirella touched his arm. He flinched slightly, like a nervous horse, but his hard face never turned from Egwene. Finally, though, he nodded and pivoted on his heel, strode farther away beneath the branches of the oaks. Gripping the sword hilt in both hands above his head, blade slanted down, he rose onto the ball of one booted foot and stood motionless. For a moment, Nisao frowned at him as though she too saw a puzzle. Then her gaze met Mirella's, and together their eyes swept to Egwene. Instead of coming to her, they went to each other, exchanging hasty whispers. At least it was an exchange at first. Then Nisao merely stood there, shaking her head in disbelief or denial. "You dropped me into this," she groaned aloud at last. "I was a blind fool to listen to you." "This should be interesting," Swan said as they finally turned toward her and Egwene. The twist she gave the word made it sound decidedly unpleasant. Mirella and Nisao hurriedly touched hair and dresses as they crossed the short distance, making certain everything was in order. Perhaps they had been caught out. In what? Egwene wondered. But apparently they intended to put the best face they could on matters. If you will step inside, Mother, Mirella said, gesturing to the nearest tent. Only the slightest tremor in her voice betrayed her cool face. The sweat was gone. Wiped away, of course, but it had not returned. Thank you, no, daughter. Some wine punch? Nisao asked with a smile. Hands clasped at her breast, she looked anxious anyway. Swan, go tell Nicola to bring the punch. Swan did not move, and Nisao blinked in surprise, her mouth thinning. The smile returned in an instant, though, and she raised her voice a little. Nicola? Child, bring the punch. Made with dried blackberries, I fear, she confided to Egwene, but quite restorative. I don't want punch, Egwene said curtly. Nicola emerged from behind the tent, yet she showed no sign of running to obey. Instead, she stood staring at the Four Eyes Sedai, chewing her underlip. Nisao flashed a glare of what could only be called distaste, but said nothing. Another piece of the puzzle snapped into place, and Egwene breathed a trifle easier. What I want, daughter, what I require, is an explanation. Best face or no, it was a thin veneer. Mirella stretched out a pleading hand. Mother, Moiraine did not choose me just because we were friends. Two of my warders belonged first to sisters who died, Avar and Newell. No other sister has saved more than one in centuries. I only became involved because of his mind, Nisao said hastily. I have some interest in diseases of the mind, and this must rightly be called one. Mirella practically dragged me into it. Smoothing her skirts, Mirella directed a dark look at the yellow that was returned with interest. Mother, when a warder's Aes Sedai dies, it is as though he swallows her death and is consumed by it from the inside. I know that, Mirella, Egwene broke in sharply. Swan and Lyanna had told her a good bit, though neither knew she had asked because she wanted to know what to expect with Gawain. A poor bargain, Mirella had called it, and perhaps it was. When a sister's warder died, grief enveloped her. She could control it somewhat, sometimes hold it in, but sooner or later it gnawed a way out. However well Swan managed when others were around, she still wept alone many nights for her Alric, killed the day she was deposed. Yet what were even months of tears compared with death itself? The stories were full of warders dying to avenge their Aes Sedai, and indeed it was very often the case. A man who wanted to die, a man looking for what could kill him, took risks not even a warder could survive. Perhaps the most horrible part of it to her was that they knew what their fate would be if their Aes Sedai died, knew what drove them when she did, knew nothing they did could change it. She could not imagine the courage required to accept the bargain, knowing. She stepped aside so she could see Lan clearly. He still stood motionless, not even seeming to breathe. Apparently forgetting the tea, Nicola had seated herself cross-legged on the ground to watch him. Arena squatted on her heels at Nicola's side, with her braid pulled over her shoulder, staring even more avidly. Much more avidly, actually, since Nicola sometimes darted furtive glances at Egwene and the others. The rest of the warders made a small cluster, pretending to watch him too while keeping a close eye on their Aes Sedai. A more than warm breeze stirred, ruffling the dead leaves that carpeted the ground, and with shocking suddenness Lan was moving, shifting from stance to stance, blade a whirling blur in his hands, faster and faster till he seemed to sprint from one to the next, yet all as precise as the movements of a clock. She waited for him to stop, or at least slow, but he did not. Faster. Arena's mouth slowly dropped open, eyes going wide with awe, and for that matter, so did Nicola's. They leaned forward, children watching candy set to dry on the kitchen table. Even the other warders really divided their attention between their Aes Sedai and him now, but in contrast to the two women, they watched a lion that might charge any moment. I see you are working him hard, Egwene said. That was part of the method for saving a warder. Few sisters were willing to make the attempt given the rate of failure and the cost of it to themselves. Keeping him from risks was another, and bonding him again, that was the first step. Without doubt, Mirella had taken care of that little detail. Poor Nynaeve. She might well strangle Mirella when she learned. Then again, she might countenance anything that kept Lan alive. Maybe. For Lan's part, he deserved the worst he received, letting himself be bonded by another woman when he knew Nynaeve was pining for him. She thought she had kept her voice clear, but something of what she felt must have crept through, because Mirella began trying to explain again. Mother, passing a bond is not that bad. Why, in point of fact, it's no more than a woman deciding who should have her husband if she dies, to see he is in the right hands. Egwene stared at her so hard that she stepped back, almost tripping over her skirts. It was only shock, though. Every time she thought she had heard of the strangest possible custom, another popped up, stranger still. We aren't all Ebudari, Mirella, Swan said dryly, and a warder isn't a husband. For most of us. Mirella's head came up defiantly. Some sisters did marry a warder, a handful. Not many married at all. No one inquired too closely, but rumor said she had married all three of hers, which surely violated custom and law even in Ebudar. Not that bad, you say, Mirella? Not that bad? Swan's scowl matched her tone. She sounded as if she had a vile taste in her mouth. There is no law against it, Nisal protested. To Egwene, not Swan. No law against passing a bond. Swan received a frown that should have made her step back and shut her mouth. She was having none of it, though. That's not the point, is it? She demanded. Even if it hasn't been done in, 400 years or more? Even if customs have changed, you might have escaped with a few stares and a little censure if all you and Moiraine had done was pass his bond between you. But he wasn't asked, was he? He was given no choice. You might as well have bonded him against his will. In fact, you bloody well did. At last the puzzle came clear for Egwene. She knew she should feel the same disgust as Swan. Aes Sedai put bonding a man against his will on a level with rape. He had as much chance to resist as a farm girl would if a man the size of Lan cornered her in a barn, if 3 men the size of Lan did. Sisters had not always been so particular, though. 1,000 years earlier it would hardly have been remarked, and even today an argument could sometimes be made as to whether a man had actually known what he was agreeing to. Hypocrisy was a fine art among Aes Sedai sometimes, like scheming or keeping secrets. The thing was, she knew he had resisted admitting his love for Nynaeve. Some nonsense about how he was bound to be killed sooner or later, and did not want to leave her a widow. Men always did spout drivel when they thought they were being logical and practical. Would Nynaeve have let him walk away unbonded had she had the chance, whatever he said? Would she herself let Gawain? He had said he would accept, yet if he changed his mind... Nisao's mouth worked, but she could not find the words she wanted. She glared at Swan as though it were all her fault, yet that was nothing alongside the scowl she directed at Mirella. I should never have listened to you, she growled. I must have been mad. Somehow Mirella still managed to maintain a smooth face, but she wavered a little, as though her knees had gone weak. I did not do it for myself, Mother. You must believe that. It was to save him. As soon as he is safe, I will pass him on to Nynaeve the way Moiraine wanted. Just as soon as she's... Egwene flung up a hand, and Mirella stopped as if she had clapped it over her mouth. You mean to pass his bond to Nynaeve? Mirella nodded uncertainly, Nisao much more vigorously. Scowling, Swan muttered something about doubling a wrong, making it 3 times as bad. Lan still had not slowed. 2 grasshoppers whirred up from the leaves behind him, and he spun, sword flicking them out of the air without a pause. Are your efforts succeeding? Is he any better? How long have you had him exactly? Only 2 weeks, Mirella replied. Today is the 20th. Mother, it could require months, and there is no guarantee. Perhaps it is time to try something different, Egwene said, more to herself than anyone else, more to convince herself than for any other reason. In his circumstances, Lan was hardly an easy present to hand anyone, but bond or no bond, he belonged to Nynaeve more than he ever would to Mirella. When she crossed the hollow to him, though, doubts sprang up strong. He whirled to face her in his dance, sword streaking toward her. Someone gasped as the blade halted abruptly only inches from her head. She was relieved that it had not been her. Brilliant blue eyes regarded her intently from beneath lowered brows, in a face all planes and angles that might have been carved from stone. Lan lowered his sword slowly.
How's your
Sweat coated him,
day going,
yet he was not even
Chris?
breathing hard. So you are the Amelin now. Mirella told me they had raised one, but not who. It seems you and I have a good deal in common. His smile was as cold as his voice, as cold as his eyes. Egwene stopped herself from adjusting her stole, reminding herself that she was Amelin and Aes Sedai. She wanted to embrace Saidar. Until this moment she had not realized exactly how dangerous he was. Nynaeve is Aes Sedai now too, Lan. She's in need of a good warder. One of the other women made a noise, but Egwene held her gaze on him. I hope she finds a hero out of legend. He barked a laugh. She'll need the hero just to face her temper. The laugh convinced her, icy hard as it was. Nynaeve is in Ebudar, Lan. You know what a dangerous city that is. She is searching for something we need desperately. If the Black Ajah learns of it, they'll kill her to get it. If the Forsaken find out... She had thought his face bleak before, but the pain that tightened his eyes at Nynaeve's danger confirmed her plan. Nynaeve, not Mirella, had the right. I am sending you to her, to act as her warder. Mother, Mirella said urgently behind her. Egwene flung out a hand to silence her. Nynaeve's safety will be in your hands, Lan. He did not hesitate, or even glance at Mirella. It will take at least a month to reach Ebudar. Arena, saddle Mandarb. On the point of turning away, he paused, lifting his free hand as if to touch her stole. I apologize for ever helping you leave the Two Rivers. You or Nynaeve. Striding away, he vanished into the tent he had come out of earlier, but before he had gone 2 steps, Mirella and Nisao and Swan were all clustered around her. Mother, you don't understand what you are proposing, Mirella said breathlessly. You might as well give a child a lighted lantern to play with in a hay barn. I began readying Nynaeve as soon as I felt his bond pass to me. I thought I had time, but she was raised to the shawl in a blink. She isn't ready to handle him, Mother. Not him, not the way he is. With an effort, Egwene made herself be patient. They still did not understand. Mirella, even if Nynaeve could not channel a lick, she could not, actually, unless she was angry. That would make no difference, and you know it. Not in whether she can handle him. There's one thing you haven't been able to do. Give him a task so important that he has to stay alive to carry it out. That was the final element. Supposedly it worked better than the rest. To him, Nynaeve's safety is that important. He loves her, Mirella, and she loves him. That explains, Mirella began softly. But Nisao burst out incredulously atop her. Oh, surely not. Not him. She might love him, I suppose, or think she does, but women have been chasing Lan since he was a beardless boy, and catching him for a day or a month. He was quite a beautiful boy, however hard that might be to believe now. Still, he does appear to have his attractions. She glanced sideways at Mirella, who frowned slightly, tiny spots of color blooming in her cheeks. She did not react any further, but that was more than enough. No, Mother. Any woman who thinks she has leashed Land Mandragoran will find she has collared only air. Egwene sighed in spite of herself. Some sisters believed there was one more part of saving a warder whose bond was broken by death, putting him into the arms, into the bed of a woman. No man could focus on death then, the belief ran. Mirella, it seemed, had taken care of that herself, too. At least she had not actually married him, not if she meant to pass him on. It would be just as well if Nynaeve never found out. Be that as it may, she told Nisao absently. Arena was fastening the girths on Mandarb's saddle with a brisk competence, the tall black stallion standing with head high, but allowing it. Plainly this was not the first time she had been around the animal. Nicola stood close by the thick bole of the farther oak, arms crossed beneath her breasts, staring at Egwene and the others. She looked ready to run. "I don't know what Arena has squeezed out of you," Egwene said quietly, but the extra lessons for Nicola stopped now. Mirella and Nisao jumped, mirror images of surprise. Swan's eyes grew to the size of teacups, but luckily she recovered before anyone noticed. "You really do know everything," Mirella whispered. "All Arena wants is to be around Lan. I think she believes he'll teach her things she can use as a hunter, or maybe that he'll go off on the hunt with her." "Nicola wants to be another Karagan," Nisao muttered caustically, "or another Moiraine. I think she had some notion she could make Mirella give Lan's bond to her. Well, at least we can deal with that pair as they deserve now that he's out in the open. Whatever happens to me, it will be a joy to know they'll be squealing from here to year's end." Swan finally realized what had been going on, and outrage warred on her face with the wondering looks she directed at Egwene. That someone else had puzzled matters out first probably upset her as much as Nicola and Arena blackmailing Aes Sedai. Or perhaps not. Nicola and Arena were not Aes Sedai themselves, after all. That drastically changed Swan's view of what was allowed. But then it did the same for any sister.
I'll be right back.
With so many eyes turned her way and not a friendly gaze in the lot, Nicola backed up against the oak tree and seemed to be trying to back further. Stains on that white dress would put her in hot water when she returned to the camp. Arena was still absorbed in Lan's horse, unaware of what was crashing down on her head. "That would be justice," Egwene agreed. "But not unless you two face full justice yourselves." Nobody was looking at Nicola anymore. Mirella's eyes filled her face, and Nisao's opened wider yet. Neither seemed to dare crack her teeth. Swan wore grim satisfaction like another skin. By her lights, they deserved no mercy at all. Not that Egwene intended to give much. "We will speak further when I come back," she told them, as Lan reappeared, his sword buckled on over a green coat undone to reveal an unlaced shirt, bulging saddlebags draped over his shoulder. The color-shifting warder cloak hanging down his back wrenched the eye as it swirled behind him. Leaving the stunned sisters to stew in their own juices, Egwene went to meet him. Swan would keep them on a fine simmer should they show any sign of falling off. "I can have you in Ebudar sooner than a month," she said. He only nodded impatiently and called for Arena to bring Mandarb. His intensity was unnerving, an avalanche poised to fall, held back by a thread. Weaving a gateway where he had been practicing the sword, a good 8 feet by 8, she stepped through onto what seemed to be a ferry, floating in darkness that stretched forever. Skimming required a platform, and though it could be anything you chose to imagine, every sister seemed to have one she preferred. For her, that was this wooden barge with stout railings. If she fell off, she could make another barge beneath her, although where she came out then would be something of a question. But for anyone who could not channel, that fall would be as endless as the black that ran off in every direction. Only at the near end of the barge was there any light, the gateway giving a constricted view of the hollow. That light did not penetrate the darkness at all, yet there was light of a sort. At least she could see quite clearly, as in Tel Ayran Riod. Not for the first time she wondered whether this actually was some part of the world of dreams. Lan followed without needing to be told, leading his horse. He examined the gateway as he came through, studied the darkness as his boots and the stallion's hooves thudded across the deck planks to her. The only question he asked was, "How quickly will this take me to Ebudar?" "It won't," she said, channeling to swing the gate shut, then closing the gateway. "Not right to the city." Nothing moved that anyone could have seen. There was no wind or breeze, nothing to feel. They were in motion, though, and fast. Faster than she could imagine anything moving. It must be 600 miles or more they had to go. "I can put you out 5, maybe 6 days north of Ebudar." She had seen the gateway woven when Nynaeve and Elaine traveled south, and she remembered enough for skimming to the same place. He nodded, peering ahead as though he could see their destination. He reminded her of an arrow in a drawn bow. Lan, Nynaeve is staying at the Tarasin Palace, a guest of Queen Tylan. She might deny she's in any danger, which she certainly would, indignantly if Egwene knew Nynaeve, and rightfully so. Try not to make a point of it, you know how stubborn she is, but you mustn't pay that any mind. If necessary, just protect her without letting her know. He said nothing, did not glance at her. She would have had 100 questions in his place. Lan, when you find her, you must tell her that Mirella will give your bond to her as soon as you three can be together. She had thought of passing that information along herself, but it seemed better not to let Nynaeve know he was coming. She was as besotted with him as as I am with Gawain, she thought ruefully. If Nynaeve knew he was on his way, there would be little room in her head for anything else. With the best will in the world, she would let the search fall on Elaine. Not that she would curl up and daydream, but any searching she did would be with dazzled eyes. Are you listening to me, Lan? Tarasin Palace, he said in a flat voice without shifting his gaze. Guest of Queen Tylan. Might deny she's in danger. Stubborn, as if I didn't know already. He looked at her then, and she almost wished he had not. She was full of saidar, full of the warmth and the joy and the power, the sheer life, but something stark and primal raged in those cold blue eyes, a denial of life. His eyes were terrifying. That was all there was to it. I will tell her everything she needs to know. You see, I listen. She made herself meet his stare without flinching, but he only turned away again. There was a mark on his neck, a bruise. It might, just might, be a bite. Perhaps she should caution him, tell him he did not have to be too detailed in any explanations about himself and Mirella. The thought made her blush. She tried not to see the bruise, but now she had noticed it, she could not seem to see anything else. Anyway, he would not be that foolish. You could not expect a man to be sensible, but even men were not that scatterbrained. In silence they floated, moving without moving. She had no fears of the Forsaken suddenly appearing here, or anyone else. Skimming had its oddities, some of which made for safety and privacy.
Hell yeah, Chris.
If two sisters wove gateways on the same spot only moments apart, aiming to skim to the same place, they would not see one another. Not unless it was exactly the same spot, with the weaves exactly identical, and neither precision was as easy to achieve as it might seem. After a time, it was hard to tell how long exactly, but she thought well under half an hour, the barge stopped suddenly. Nothing altered in the feel, nor in the weaves she held. She simply knew that one moment they were speeding through the blackness, and the next standing still. Opening a gateway just at the barge's bow, she was not sure where one opened at the stern would lead, and not anxious to find out, frankly. Moghedien had found the very idea frightening. She motioned Lan to go ahead. The barge only existed so long as she was present, another thing like Tel'aran'rhiod. Riod. He swung back the ferry gate leading Mandarb out, and when she followed, he was already in the saddle. She left the gateway open for her return. Low, rolling hills ran off in every direction, covered in withered grass. There was not a tree to be seen, nothing more than patches of shriveled scrub brush. The stallion's hooves kicked up little spurts of dust. The morning sun in that cloudless sky baked even hotter here than in Murandy. Long-winged vultures circled over something to the south, and in another place to the west. Lan, she began, meaning to make sure he understood what he was to tell Nynaeve, but he forestalled her. 5 or 6 days, you said, he said, peering south. I can make it faster. She will be safe, I promise. Mandarb danced, impatient as his rider, but Lan held him easily. You've come a very long way since Emmonsfield. Looking down at her, he smiled. Any warmth in it was swallowed by his eyes. You have a hold on Mirella and Nisao now. Don't let them argue with you again. By your command, Mother. The watch is not done. With a small bow, he dug in his heels, walking Mandarb just far enough to put her clear of the dust before setting the horse to a gallop. Watching him speed southward, she closed her mouth. Well, he had noticed in the middle of all that sword practice, noticed and done the sums correctly, apparently including sums he could not have suspected before seeing her with the stole. Nynaeve had better take care. She always did think men were dimmer than they actually were. At least they can't get into any real trouble, she told herself aloud. Lan topped a hill and vanished over the other side. Had there been any real danger in Ebu Dar, Elaine or Nynaeve would have said something. They did not meet often. She just had too much to do. But they had worked out a way to leave messages in the Salidar of Tel Iran Riod whenever there was need for one. A wind that might have come from an open oven gusted up sheets of dust.
Yeah, cheers.
Coughing, she covered her mouth and nose with a corner of the Amelin-striped stole and hurriedly retreated through the gateway to her ferry. The journey back was silent and boring, leaving her to worry whether she had done the right thing sending Lan, whether it was right to keep Nynaeve in the dark. It's done, she kept telling herself, but that did not help. When she stepped once more into the hilltop hollow beneath the oak trees, Mirella's third warder, Avar Hachami, had joined the others, a hawk-nosed man with thick gray-streaked mustaches like down-curving horns. All four Gaidin were hard at work, the tents down and nearly folded. Nicola and Arena trotted back and forth, loading all the camp paraphernalia into the cart, everything from blankets to cookpots and black iron wash kettle. They really did trot, not pausing, but at least half their attention was on Swan and the other two sisters, over near the tree line. For that matter, the warders gave the three Aes Sedai much more than half their consideration. Their ears might as well have been up in points. Who was simmering who seemed to be a question. Not speak to me in that manner, Swan, Mirella was saying. Not only loud enough to be heard across the clearing, but cold enough to keep the edge off the weather. Arms folded tightly beneath her breasts, she was drawn up to every inch of height, imperious to the point of bursting. Do you hear me? You will not. Are you lost to all propriety, Swan? Nisal's hands were knotted in her skirts, in a vain attempt to keep herself from quivering, and the heat in her voice easily matched the ice in Mirella's. If you've forgotten simple manners completely, you can be taught again. Facing them with her hands on her hips, Swan moved her head jerkily, struggling both to keep a glare on her face and to keep it fixed on the other two. I am only... When she saw Egwene approaching, her relief bloomed like a flower in spring. Mother, that was almost a gasp. I was explaining possible penalties. She drew a long breath and went on more definitely. The Hall will have to invent them as they go, of course, but I think they might well start with making these two pass their warders to others, since they seem so fond of it. Mirella squeezed her eyes shut, and Nisao turned to look at the warders. Her expression never changed, calm if a touch flushed, but Saren stumbled to his feet and took 3 quick steps toward her before she raised a hand to stop him. A warder could sense his Aes Sedai's presence, her pain, her fear and anger, every bit as much as Egwene could feel Moghedien's when she wore the Eidam. No wonder all the Gaidin moved on their toes and looked ready to spring at something. They might not know what had driven their Aes Sedai to the brink of despair, but they knew the two women were at that brink, which was exactly where Egwene wanted them. She did not like this part of it. All the maneuvering was like a game, but this, I do what I must, she thought, unsure whether that was an attempt to stiffen her backbone or an attempt to excuse what she was about to do. Swan, please send Nicola and Arena back to the camp. What they did not see, they could not tell. We can't have their tongues flapping, so make sure they know what will happen to them. Tell them they have one more chance, because the Amerlin is feeling merciful, but they'll never get another. I think I can manage that much, Swan replied, and gathering her skirts, she stalked off. No one could stalk like Swan, yet she seemed more eager to be away from Mirella and Nisao than anything else. Mother, Nisao said, choosing her words. Before you left, you said something indicated there might be some way for us to avoid... Some way we might not have to... She glanced at Saren again. Mirella would have been a study in Aes Sedai's serenity as she examined Egwene, except that her fingers were laced together so tightly that her knuckles strained the thin leather of her gloves. Egwene motioned them to wait. Nicola and Arena, turning away from the cart, saw Swan coming and went stiff as posts, which was no wonder, considering that Swan advanced as though she intended to walk right over them and the cart. Arena's head swiveled, searching, but before she could think to actually run, Swan's hands darted out and caught each of them by an ear. What she said was too low to carry, yet Arena stopped trying to pry her ear free. Her hand stayed on Swan's wrist, but she almost seemed to be using it to hold herself up. A look of such horror oozed across Nicola's face that Egwene wondered whether Swan might be going too far. But then maybe not, under the circumstances. They were going to walk free of their crime. A pity she could not find a way to harness such a talent for ferreting out what was hidden, a way to harness it safely. Whatever Swan said when she loosed their ears, the pair immediately turned toward Egwene and dropped into curtsies. Nicola's was so low it nearly put her face on the ground, and Arena came close to falling on hers. Swan clapped hands sharply, and the two women bounded to their feet, scrambled to untie a pair of shaggy wagon horses from the picket line. They were astride bareback and galloping out of the hollow so quickly it was a wonder they did not have wings. They won't even talk in their sleep, Swan said sourly when she returned. I can still handle novices and scoundrels, at least. Her eyes stayed on Egwene's face, avoiding the other two sisters entirely. Suppressing a sigh, Egwene turned to Mirella and Nisao. She had to do something about Swan, but first things first. The green sister and the brown eyed her warily. It is very simple, she said in a firm voice. Without my protection, you will very likely lose your warders, and almost certainly wish you'd been skinned alive by the time the hall finishes with you. Your own Ajahs may have a few choice words for you as well. It may be years before you can hold your heads up again, years before you don't have sisters looking over your shoulder every minute. But why should I protect you from justice? It puts me under an obligation. You might do the same again, or worse. The wise ones had their part in this, though it was not exactly Ji'ito. If I'm to take on that responsibility, then you must have an obligation too. I must be able to trust you utterly, and I can only see one way to do that. The wise ones, and then Phaolane and Theodrin. You must swear fealty. They had been frowning, wondering where she was headed, but wherever they thought, it was not where she ended. Their faces were a study. Nisao's jaw dropped, and Mirella looked as though she had been hit between the eyes with a hammer. Even Swan gaped in disbelief. Impossible, Mirella spluttered. No sister has ever. No Amerlin has required. You can't really think. Oh, do be quiet, Mirella, Nisao snapped. This is all your fault. I should never have listened. Well, done is done, and what is, is. Peering at Egwene from beneath lowered brows, she muttered, You are a dangerous young woman, Mother. A very dangerous woman. You may break the tower more than it already is before you're done. If I was sure of that, if I had the courage to do my duty and face whatever comes. Yet she knelt smoothly, pressing her lips to the great serpent ring on Egwene's finger. Beneath the light and by my hope of rebirth and salvation. Not the same wording as Phaolane and Theodrin, but every scrap as strong. More. By the three oaths, no Aes Sedai could speak a vow she did not mean. Except the Black Ajah, of course. It seemed obvious they must have found a way to lie. Whether either of these women was black was a problem for another time, though. Swan, eyes popping and mouth working without a sound, looked like a fish stranded on a mudbank. Mirella tried another protest, but Egwene just thrust out her right hand with the ring, and Mirella's knees folded in jerks. She gave the oath in bitter tones, then looked up. You've done what has never been done before, Mother. That is always dangerous. It won't be the last time, Egwene told her. In fact, my first order to you is that you will tell no one that Swan is anything but what everybody thinks. My second is, you will obey any order she gives as if it came from me. Their heads turned toward Swan, faces unruffled. As you command, mother, they murmured together. It was Swan who looked ready to faint. She was still staring at nothing when they reached the road and turned their horses east toward the Aes Sedai camp and the army. The sun still climbed toward its zenith, still well short. It had been a morning eventful as most days, most weeks for that matter. Egwene let Daishar amble. Mirella was right, Swan mumbled finally. With her rider's mind elsewhere, the mare moved with something close to a smooth gait. She actually made Swan appear a competent rider. Fealty. No one has ever done that. No one. There isn't so much as a hint in the secret histories. And them, obeying me. You aren't just changing a few things. You're rebuilding the boat while sailing a storm. Everything is changing. And Nicola. In my day, a novice would have wet herself if she even thought of blackmailing a sister. Not their first attempt, Egwene told her, relating the facts in as few words as possible. She expected Swan to explode in a fury at the pair, but instead the woman said quite calmly, I fear our two adventurous lasses are about to meet with accidents. No. Egwene reined in so suddenly that Swan's mare ambled another half-dozen paces before she could bring the animal under control and turn her, all the while muttering imprecations under her breath. She sat there, giving Egwene a patient look that outdid Lilane at her worst. Mother, they have a club over your head if they're ever smart enough to think it out. Even if the Hall doesn't force you into a penance, you can watch any hope you have with them sail right over the horizon. She shook her head disgustedly. I knew you would do it when I sent you out. I knew you'd have to. But I never thought Elaine and Nynaeve were witless enough to bring back anyone who knew. Those two girls deserve all they'll catch if this gets out. But you can't afford to let it out. Nothing is to happen to Nicola or Arena, Swan. If I approve killing them for what they know, who's next? Romonda and Lilane? For not agreeing with me? Where does it stop? In a way, she felt disgusted with herself. Once she would not have understood what Swan meant. It was always better to know than to be ignorant, but sometimes ignorance was much more comfortable. Heeling Daishar on, she said, I won't have a day of victory spoiled with talk of murder. Mirella wasn't even the beginning, Swan. This morning, Théoline and Theodrin were waiting. Swan brought the plump mare in closer to listen as they rode. The news did not relieve Swan's concern over Nicola and Arena, but Egwene's plan certainly put a sparkle in her eye and a smile of anticipation on her lips. By the time they reached the Aes Sedai camp, she was eager to take on her next task, which was to tell Shiriam and the rest of Mirella's friends that they were expected in the Amerlin study at midday. She could even say quite truthfully that nothing would be required of them that other sisters had not done before. For all her talk of victory, Egwene did not feel so zestful. She barely heard blessings and calls for blessings, acknowledging them with only a wave of her hand, and was sure she missed more than she did hear. She could not countenance murder, but Nicola and Arena would bear watching. Will I ever reach a place where the difficulties don't keep piling up? She wondered. Somewhere a victory did not seem to have to be matched by a new danger. When she walked into her tent, her mood sank right to her feet. Her head throbbed. She was beginning to think she should just stay away from the tent altogether. Two carefully folded sheets of parchment sat neatly atop the writing table, each sealed with wax and each bearing the words, "Sealed to the flame." For anyone other than the Amerlin, breaking that seal was accounted as serious as assaulting the Amerlin's person. She wished she did not have to break them. There was no doubt in her mind who had written those words. Unfortunately, she was right. Romonda suggested, demanded was a better word, that the Amerlin issue an edict sealed to the hall, known only to the sitters. The sisters were all to be summoned one by one, and any who refused was to be shielded and confined as a suspected member of the Black Aja. What they were to be summoned for was left rather vague, but Lilane had more than hinted this morning. Lelane's own missive bore her manner all over it, mother to child, what should be done for Egwene's own good and everyone's. The edict she wanted was only to be sealed to the ring. Any sister could know, and in fact, in this case, they would have to. Mention of the Black Aja was to be forbidden as fomenting discord, a serious charge under Tower law, with appropriate penalties. Egwene dropped onto her folding chair with a groan, and of course the legs shifted and nearly deposited her on the carpet. She could delay and sidestep, but they would keep coming back with these idiocies. Sooner or later, one would introduce her modest proposal to the hall, and that would put the fox in the hen yard. Were they blind? Fomenting discord? Lelaine would have every sister convinced not just that there was a Black Aja, but that Egwene was part of it. The stampede of Aes Sedai back to Tarvalin and Elida could not be far behind. Romanda just meant to set off a mutiny. There were 6 of those hidden in the secret histories. Half a dozen in more than 3,000 years might not be very many, but each had resulted in an Amerlin resigning, and the entire hall as well. Lelaine knew that, and Romanda. Lelaine had been a sitter for nearly 40 years, with access to all the hidden records. Before resigning to go into a country retreat, as many sisters did in age, Romanda had held a chair for the Yellow so long that some said she had had as much power as any Amerlin she sat under. Being chosen to sit a second time was nearly unheard of, but Romanda was not going to let power reside anywhere outside her own hands, if she could manage. No, they were not blind, just afraid. Everybody was, including her, and even Aes Sedai did not always think clearly when they were afraid. She refolded the pages, wanting to crumple them up and stamp her feet on them. Her head was going to burst. May I come in, Mother? Halima Saranov swayed into the tent without waiting for an answer. The way Halima moved always drew every male eye from age 12 to 2 days past the grave. But then if she hid herself in a heavy cloak from the shoulders down, men still would stare. Long black hair, glistening as if she washed it every day in fresh rainwater, framed a face that made sure of that. Delana Sedai thought you might want to see this. She's putting it before the hall this morning. The hall was sitting without so much as informing her. Well, she had been away, but custom, if not law, said the Amerlin must be informed before the hall could sit, unless they were sitting to depose her anyway. At that moment, she would almost have taken it as a blessing. She eyed the folded sheet of paper Halima laid on her table much as she would a poisonous snake. Not sealed. The newest novice could read it, so far as Delana was concerned. The declaration that Elida was a dark friend, of course. Not quite as bad as Romanda or Lelaine, but if she heard the hall had broken up in a riot, she would hardly blink. Halima, I could wish you'd gone home when Cabriana died. Or at least that Delana had had the sense to seal the woman's information to the hall, or even to the flame, instead of telling every sister she could collar. I could hardly do that, Mother. Halima's green eyes flashed with what seemed challenge or defiance, but she only had 2 ways to look at anyone: a wide, direct stare that dared, and a lidded gaze that smoldered. Her eyes caused a lot of misunderstanding. After Cabriana Sedai told me what she'd learned about Elida and her plans, Cabriana was my friend, and friend to you, to all of you opposing Elida, so I had no choice. I only thanked the light she mentioned Salidar, so I knew where to come. She put her hands on a waist as small as Egwene's had been in Tel Aran Riod, and tilted her head to one side, studying Egwene intently. Your brain is hurting again, isn't it? Cabriana used to have such pains, so bad they made her toes cramp. She had to soak in hot water till she could bear to put on clothes. It took days sometimes. If I hadn't come, yours could have gotten that bad eventually. Moving around behind the chair, she began kneading Egwene's scalp. Halima's fingers possessed a skill that melted pain away. You could hardly ask another sister for healing as often as you have these aches. It's just tightness anyway. I can feel it. I suppose I couldn't, Egwene murmured. She rather liked the woman, whatever anyone said, and not just for her talent in smoothing away headaches. Halima was earthy and open, a countrywoman, however much time she had spent gaining a skim of city sophistication, balancing respect for the Amelin with a sort of neighborliness in a way Egwene found refreshing. Startling sometimes, but enlivening. Even Chesa did not do better, but Chesa was always the servant, even if friendly, while Halima never showed the slightest obsequiousness. Yet Egwene really did wish she had gone back to her home when Cabriana fell from that horse and broke her neck. It might have been useful had the sisters accepted Cabriana's belief that Elida intended to still half of them and break the rest, but everyone was sure Halima had garbled that somehow. It was the black Ajah they latched onto. Women unused to being afraid of anything had taken what they had always denied and terrified themselves half witless with it. How was she to root the dark friends out without scattering the other sisters like a frightened covey of quail? How to stop them scattering sooner or later anyway? Light. How? Think on looseness, Halima said softly. Your face is loose. Your neck is loose. Your shoulders. Her voice was almost hypnotic, a drone that seemed to caress each part of Egwene's body she wanted to relax. Some women disliked her just for the way she looked, of course, as though a particularly lascivious man had dreamed her, and a good many claimed she flirted with anything in breeches, which Egwene could not have approved of. But Halima admitted she liked looking at men. Her worst critics never claimed she had done more than flirt, and she herself became indignant at the suggestion. She was no fool. Egwene had known that at their first conversation, the day after Logain escaped, when the headaches had begun. Not at all the brainless flipskirt. Egwene suspected it was much as with Mary. Halima could not help her face or her manner. Her smile seemed inviting or teasing because of the shape of her mouth. She smiled the same at man or woman or child. It was hardly her fault that people thought she was flirting when she was only looking. Besides, she had never mentioned the headaches to anyone. If she had, every yellow sister in the camp would be laying siege. That indicated friendship, if not loyalty. Egwene's eyes fell on the papers on the writing table, and her thoughts drifted under Halima's stroking fingers. Torches ready to be tossed into the haystack. 10 days to the border of Andor, unless Lord Bryn was willing to push without knowing why, and no opposition before. Could she hold those torches back 10 days? South Harbor, North Harbor, the keys to Tarvalin. How could she be sure of Nicola and Arena, short of Swan's suggestion? She needed to arrange for every sister to be tested before they reached Andor. She had the talent for working with metals and ores, but it was rare among Aes Sedai. Nicola, Arena, the Black Ajah. You're tensing again. Stop worrying over the hall. Those soothing fingers paused, then began once more. This would do better tonight, after you've had a hot bath. I could work your shoulders and back everywhere. We haven't tried that yet. You're stiff as a stake. You should be supple enough to bend backwards and put your head between your ankles. Mind and body. One can't be limber without the other. Just put yourself in my hands. Egwene teetered on the brink of sleep. Not a dream-walker's sleep, just sleep. How long since she had done that? The camp would be in an uproar once Delana's proposal got out, which it would soon enough, and that was before she had to tell Ramonda and Lelaine she had no intention of issuing their edicts. But there was one thing yet today to look forward to, a reason to remain awake. That will be nice, she murmured, meaning more than the promised massage. Long ago she had pledged that one day she would bring Shiriam to heel, and today was the day. At last she was beginning to be the Amerlin, in control. Very nice. Chapter 13. The Bowl of the Winds. Avienda would have sat on the floor, but 3 other women occupying the boat's small room left not quite enough space, so she had to be content with folding her legs atop one of the carved wooden benches built against the walls. That way it was not so much like sitting in a chair. At least the door was shut, and there were no windows, only fanciful carved scrollwork piercing the walls near the ceiling. She could not see the water outside, but the piercings let in the smell of salt and the slap of waves against the hull and the splash of the oars. Even the shrill, hollow cries of some sort of birds shouted of vast expanses of water. She had seen men die for a pool they might have stepped across, but this water was bitter beyond belief. Reading of it was not at all the same as tasting it. And the river had been at least half a mile wide where they boarded this boat with its two oddly leering oarsmen. Half a mile of water, and not a drop fit for drinking. Who could imagine useless water? The motion of the boat had changed to a rocking back and forth. Were they out of the river yet? Into what was called the bay? That was wider still, far wider, so Elaine said. Avienda locked her hands on her knees and tried desperately to think of anything else. If the others saw her fear, the shame would follow her to the end of her days. The worst of it was she had suggested this, after hearing Elaine and Nynaeve talk of the sea folk. How could she have known what it would be like? The blue silk of her dress felt incredibly smooth, and she latched onto that. She was barely used to skirts at all. She still yearned for the cut-in sore the wise ones had made her burn when she began training with them. And here she wore a silk dress, of which she now owned four, and silk stockings instead of stout wool, and a silk shift that made her aware of her skin in a way she never had been before. She could not deny the beauty of the dress, no matter how odd it was to find herself wearing such things, but silk was precious and rare. A woman might have a scarf of silk, to be worn on feast days and envied by others. Few women had two. It was different among these wetlanders, though. Not everyone wore silk, yet sometimes it seemed to her every second person did. Great bolts and even bales of it came by ship from the lands beyond the threefold land. By ship. On the ocean. Water stretching to the horizon, with many places where, if she understood correctly, you could not see land at all. She came close to shivering at the impossible thought. None of the others looked as if they wished to talk. Elaine absently twisted the great serpent ring on her right hand and peered at something not to be seen inside the four walls. These worries often overtook her. Two duties confronted her, and if one lay nearer her heart, she had chosen the one she considered more important, more honorable. It was her right and duty to become the chief, the queen of Andor, but she had chosen to continue hunting. In a way, however important their search, that was like putting something before clan or society, yet Avienda felt pride. Elaine's view of honor was as peculiar at times as the notion of a woman being a chief, or her becoming chief just because her mother had been, but she followed it admirably. Brigitta, in the wide red trousers and short yellow coat Avienda envied, sat toying with her waist-long braid, lost in thought as well, or maybe sharing part of Elaine's worries. She was Elaine's first warder, which upset the Aes Sedai back in the Tarasin Palace no end, though it did not seem to bother their warders. Wetlander customs were so curious they hardly bore thinking about. If Elaine and Brigitta seemed to deflect any thought of talk, Nynaeve Almira, directly opposite Avienda by the door, rebuffed it firmly. Nynaeve, not Nynaeve Almira. Wetlanders like to be called by only half their names, and Avienda was trying to remember, however much it felt like using a honey name. Rand al'Thor was the only lover she had ever had, and she did not think even of him so intimately. But she had to learn their ways if she was to wed one of them. Nynaeve's deep brown eyes stared through her. Her knuckles were white on a thick braid as dark as Brigitta's was golden, and her face had gone beyond pale to a faint green. From time to time she emitted a tiny muted groan. She did not usually sweat. She and Elaine had taught Avienda the trick. Nynaeve was a puzzle. Brave to the point of madness sometimes, she moaned over her supposed cowardice, and here she displayed her shame for all to see without a care. How could the motion disturb her so when all that water did not? Water again. Avienda shut her eyes to avoid seeing Nynaeve's face, but that only made the sounds of the birds and the lapping water fill her head. I have been thinking, Elaine said suddenly, then paused. Are you all right, Avienda? You... Avienda's cheeks reddened, but at least Elaine did not say aloud that she had jumped like a rabbit at the sound of her voice. Elaine seemed to realize how close she had come to revealing Avienda's dishonor. Color flushed her own cheeks as she continued. I was thinking about Nicola and Arena, about what Egwene told us last night. You don't suppose they can cause her any trouble, do you? What is she to do? Rid herself of them, Avienda said, drawing a thumb across her neck. The relief of speaking, of hearing voices, was so great that she almost gasped. Elaine appeared shocked. She was remarkably soft-hearted at times. It might be for the best, Birgitta said. She had revealed no more name than that. Avienda thought her a woman with secrets. Arena could have made something of herself with time, but don't look at me that way, Elaine, and stop going all prim and indignant in your head. Birgitta often slipped back and forth between the warder who obeyed and the older first sister who instructed whether or not you wished to learn. Right then, waving an admonishing finger, she was the first sister. You two wouldn't have been warned to stay away if it was a difficulty the Amerlin could solve by having them set to work with the laundresses or the like. Elaine gave a sharp sniff in the face of what she could not deny, and adjusted her green silk skirts where they were drawn up in front to expose layers of blue and white petticoats. She was wearing the local fashion, complete with creamy lace at her wrists and around her neck, a gift from Tylin Quintara, as was the close-fitting necklace of woven gold. Avienda did not approve. The upper half of the dress, the bodice, fitted as snugly as that necklace, and a missing narrow oval of cloth revealed the inner slopes of her breasts. Walking about where all could see was not the same as the sweat tents. People in the streets of the city were not Gaishane. Her own dress had a high neck that brushed her chin with lace, and no parts of it missing. Besides, Birgitta went on, I would think Marigan would worry you more. She frightens me spitless. That name got through to Nynaeve, as well it might. Her groaning ceased, and she sat up straight. If she comes after us, we will just settle for her again. We'll... Drawing breath, she stared at them pointedly as if they were arguing with her. What she said in a faint voice was, Do you think she will? Fretting will do no good, Elaine told her, much more calmly than Avienda could have managed if she thought one of the Shadow Souls had marked her out. We will just have to do as Egwene said and be careful. Nynaeve muttered something inaudible, which was probably just as well. Silence descended again, Elaine settling to a browner study than before, Birgitta propping her chin on one hand as she frowned at nothing. Nynaeve kept right on grumbling under her breath, but she had both hands pressed to her middle now, and from time to time she paused to swallow. The splashing of water seemed louder than ever, and the cries of the birds. I have been thinking too, near sister. She and Elaine had not reached the point of adopting each other as first sisters yet, but she was sure they would now. Already they brushed each other's hair, and every night in the dark shared another secret never told to anyone else. This Min woman, though, that was for later, when they were alone. About what? Elaine asked absently. Our search. We prepare for success, but we are as far away as when we began. Does it make sense not to use every weapon at hand? Matt Cawthon is Taviran, yet we work to avoid him. Why not take him with us? With him we might find the bowl at last. Matt? Nynaeve exclaimed incredulously. As well stuff your shift full of nettles. I would not endure the man if he had the bowl in his coat pocket. Oh, do be quiet, Nynaeve, Elaine murmured, without any heat. She shook her head wonderingly, taking no notice of the other's sudden glower. Prickly only began to describe Nynaeve, but they were all used to her ways. Why didn't I think of that? It's so obvious. Maybe, Birgitta murmured dryly. You had met the scoundrel set so hard in your mind you couldn't see he had any use. Elaine gave her a cool stare, chin raised, then abruptly grimaced and nodded reluctantly. She did not accept criticism easily. No, Nynaeve said in a voice that somehow managed to be sharp and weak at the same time. The sickly cast of her face had deepened, but it no longer seemed caused by the boat's heaving. You cannot possibly mean it. Elaine, you know what a torment he can be, how stubborn he is. He'll insist on bringing those soldiers of his like a feast day parade. Try finding anything in the Rahad with soldiers at your shoulder. Just try. Inside 2 steps, he'll try to take charge, flaunting that Turangrial at us. He's 1,000 times worse than Van Deen or Adelius, or even Marililla. The way he behaves, you would think we'd walk into a bear's den just to see the bear. Brigitta made a noise in her throat that might have been amusement, and received a darted glare. She returned such a look of bland innocence that Nynaeve began to sound as if she were choking. Elaine was more soothing. She probably would try to make peace in a water feud. He is Taviran, Nynaeve. He alters the pattern, alters chance, just being there. I'm ready to admit we need luck, and a Taviran is more than luck. Besides, we can snare 2 birds at once. We should not have been letting him run loose all this time, no matter how busy we were. That's done no one any good, him least of all. He needs to be made fit for decent company. We will put him on a short rein from the start. Nynaeve smoothed her skirts with considerable vigor. She claimed to have no more interest in dresses than Avienda, in what they looked like anyway. She was always muttering about good plain wool being fine enough for anybody, yet her own blue dress was slashed with yellow on the skirts and sleeves, and she herself had chosen its design. Every stitch she owned was silk or embroidered or both, all cut with what Avienda had learned to recognize as fine care. For once, Nynaeve appeared to understand she would not get her way. Sometimes she threw amazing tantrums until she did, not that she would admit that was what they were. The glower faded to a grumpy sulk. Who will ask him? Whoever does, he will make her beg. You know he will. I'd sooner marry him. Elaine hesitated, then said firmly, Birgitta will, and she won't beg, she will tell him. Most men will do as you say if you use a firm, confident voice. Nynaeve looked doubtful, and Brigitta jerked erect on her bench, startled for the first time Avienda had ever seen. With anyone else, Avienda might have said she looked a little afraid, too. Brigitta would have done very well as Far Darai Smai for a wetlander. She had remarkable skill with a bow. You are the clear choice, Brigitta, Elaine went on quickly. Nynaeve and I are Aes Sedai, and Avienda might as well be. We cannot possibly do it, not and maintain proper dignity. Not with him. You know what he is like. What had happened to all that talk of a firm, confident voice? Not that Avienda had ever noticed that working for anyone except Cerelia. It surely had not so far unmat Quaffon that she had seen. Brigitta, he can't have recognized you. If he had, he would have said something by now. Whatever that meant, Brigitta leaned back against the wall and laced her fingers over her stomach. I should have known you'd get back at me ever since I said it was a good thing your bottom wasn't any... She stopped, and a faint, satisfied smile appeared on her lips. Nothing changed in Elaine's expression, but plainly Brigitta thought she had gained a measure of revenge. It must have been something felt through the warder bond. How Elaine's bottom entered into anything, though, Avienda could not puzzle out. Wetlanders were so odd at times. Brigitta continued, still wearing that smile. What I don't understand is why he starts chafing as soon as he sees you two. It can't be that you snagged him off here. Egwene was as deep in that as you, but I saw him treat her with more respect than most of the sisters do. Besides the times I've glimpsed him coming out of the Wandering Woman, he looked to be enjoying himself. Her smile became a grin that made Elaine sniff disapprovingly. That is one thing we need to change. A decent woman cannot be in the room with him. Oh, do wipe that smirk off your face, Brigitta. I vow you are as bad as he sometimes. The man was born just to be a Nynaeve muttered sourly. Suddenly, Avienda was forcibly reminded that she was on a boat, as everything lurched, swaying and swinging around to a halt. Rising and straightening dresses, they gathered the light cloaks they had brought. She did not don hers. The sunlight here was not so bright that she needed the hood to keep it from her eyes. Brigitta only draped hers over one shoulder and pushed open the door, following up the 3 steps after Nynaeve had rushed past her, with a hand clapped over her mouth. Elaine paused to tie her cloak ribbons and arrange the hood around her face, red gold curls peeking out all around. You did not say much, near sister. I said what I had to say. The decision was yours. The key thought was yours, though. Sometimes I think the rest of us are turning into half-wits. Well, half turning to the steps, not quite looking at her, Elaine paused. Distances bother me sometimes, over water. I think I will look only at the ship, myself. Nothing else. Avienda nodded. Her near sister had a fine delicacy, and they went up. On the deck, Nynaeve was just shaking off Brigitta's offer of help and pushing herself up from the railing. The 2 oarsmen looked on in amusement as she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Shirtless fellows with a brass hoop in each ear, they must have had frequent use for the curved daggers shoved behind their sashes. Most of their attention went to working their pairs of long sweeps, though, walking back and forth on the deck to hold the heaving boat in place near a ship that almost took Avienda's breath with its size, looming above their suddenly very tiny vessel, its 3 great masts reaching taller than most trees she had seen even here in the wetlands. They had chosen it because it was the largest of the hundreds of seafolk ships anchored in the bay. On a ship that big, surely it must be possible to forget all the surrounding water. Except Elaine had not really acknowledged her shame, and if she had, a near sister could know your deepest humiliation without it mattering, but Amis said she had too much pride. She made herself turn and look away from the boat. She had never seen so much water in her life. Not if every drop seen before had been gathered in one place, all of it rolling gray-green and here and there frothing white. Her eyes darted, trying to avoid taking it in. Even the sky seemed larger here, immense, with a liquid gold sun crawling up from the east. A gusting wind blew, somewhat cooler than on the land, and never failing entirely. Clouds of birds flurried in the air, gray and white and sometimes splotched with black, giving those shrill cries. One, all black except for its head, skimmed along the surface with its long lower beak slicing through the water, and a slanted line of ungainly brown birds, pelicans Elaine had named them, suddenly folded their wings one by one and plummeted with great splashes, bobbing back to the top, where they floated, tilting up beaks of incredible size. There were ships everywhere, many almost as large as the one behind her, not all belonging to the Atha an Nier, and smaller vessels with 1 or 2 masts moving under triangular sails. Smaller ships still, mastless like the boat she was on, with a high sharp peak at the front and a low flat house at the back, spidered across the water on oars, 1 pair or 2, or sometimes 3. One long narrow boat that must have had 20 to a side looked like 100 legs skittering along. And there was land. Maybe 7 or 8 miles distant, sunlight gleamed off the white plastered buildings of the city. 7 or 8 miles of water. Swallowing, she turned back more swiftly than she had turned away. She thought her cheeks must be greener than Nynaeve had been. Elaine was watching her, trying to keep a smooth face, but wetlanders showed their emotions so plainly her concern was visible. I'm a fool, Elaine. Even with her, using no more of her name made Avienda feel uneasy. When they were first sisters, when they were sister wives, it would be easier. A wise woman listens to wise advice. You are braver than I will ever be, Elaine replied, quite seriously. She was another who kept denying that she had any courage. Maybe that was also a wetlander custom? No. Avienda had heard wetlanders speak of their own bravery. These Ebudari, for one, seemed unable to utter 3 words without boasting. Elaine drew a deep breath, steeling herself. Tonight we will talk about Rand. Avienda nodded, but she did not see how that followed from talk of courage. How could sister wives manage a husband if they did not talk of him in detail? That was what the older women told her anyway, and the wise ones. They were not always so forthcoming, of course. When she complained to Amis and Bear that she must be ill because she felt as though Randall Thor was carrying some part of her around with him, they had fallen down laughing. You will learn, they cackled at her, and you would have learned sooner had you grown up in skirts. As if she had ever wanted any life but that of a maiden, running with her spear sisters. Maybe Elaine felt something of the same emptiness. Speaking of him did seem to make the hollowness grow, even while filling it. For some time she had been aware of voices rising, and now she heard the words. You earringed buffoon! Nynaeve was shaking her fist at a very dark man peering down at her from over the tall side of the ship. He looked calm, but then he could not see the glow of Sidar surrounding her. We are not after the gift of passage, so it doesn't matter whether you refuse it to Aes Sedai. You let down a ladder this instant. The men at the oars were missing their grins. Apparently they had failed to see the serpent rings back at the stone landing, and they did not look pleased to learn they had Aes Sedai aboard. Oh dear, Elaine sighed. I must retrieve this Avienda, or we've wasted the morning just so she could lose her breakfast porridge. Gliding across the deck, Avienda was proud of knowing the proper names for things on boats, Elaine addressed the man up on the ship. I am Elaine Trekend, daughter heir of Andor and Aes Sedai of the Green Aja. My companion is quite truthful. We do not seek the gift of passage, but we must speak with your wind finder on a matter of urgency. Tell her we know of the weaving of winds. Tell her we know of wind finders. The man above frowned down at her.
Alright, everyone, I'm going to call into the stream for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.